love. Live. Yeah, you can send it.
We'll get started in just a minute, thanks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our regularly scheduled October Board of Education meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Sonia, you have a roll call, please. Thank you. Tonight, the Pledge of Allegiance is going to be provided by our PAL students. Everyone want to join me? The Pledge of Allegiance.
Action.
Hi, my name is Maya Gill, and we're from Lincoln State High School. We say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. First on the agenda tonight is our recognition, and tonight that will be presented by Principal of the High School, Kevin Richard. Kevin, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to thank here. So this is our PALS, student for our PALS program in our awesome PALS Cafe. If you haven't had a chance to come to high school and check out our cafe, we recommend you do that. So our students in our PALS classroom, Mr. Sweeney, Ms. Gusha, and Ms. Raleigh, combination of 3 classes in there together, and that is that part of their career goals are to work in the cafe selling coffee, brownies, cookies, etc. So just wanted to take a moment to highlight them. We were back and forth whether to physically all come here tonight or the video won in the end. So that is why we have them tonight, but big shout out to that group. So thanks for having us tonight. I'm going to speak briefly about some of our goals and some of the things the high school have done this year. And then I have Angela Penegrosa with us, who's our new Dean of Students, to talk about our PATS program, which is a new program we started in the high school this year. So we have 4 goals that we are really focusing strongly on at the high school this year. Our first one is around our co-teaching practices. Just a little fancy data. No. Okay. Anyways, our first goal is around co-teaching practices. And so what we did is we've been consulting with our BOCES partners who are coming in and working with our various co-teaching partners to really focus on intentionality within our co-teaching. We're finding that one of the areas we still have to work on is what is each individual co-teacher doing in the room, and making sure that when we're having those planning sessions that they're actually really focused on intentionality. And it's not just kind of see what needs what help today is, but it's really about, we're 2 people playing together, really looking at what instructional strategies are needed to help that particular student within that room. Another goal we're really focusing on, which these all very much align with your district goals from the board goals, is our culturally and linguistically responsive teaching and learning. We've made a slight shift in who we're working with at the high school. We have a consultant who actually starting on Friday with us, Dr. Abraham. He's a former principal out of Buffalo who worked in a school that's almost identical to ours at high school. And he now works all over the country working with schools, trying to increase graduation rate, especially for those Black males. So he has a book called What Success Looks Like, which my admin team has been reading, working through, and that's who we'll be working with now. He really focuses his kind of practices around a couple of things, but his 2 main things are log and data, which really struck with me when we read this book, because I really think that's something that we at the high school have really strived to look at those things as well. So we're very much aligned with our district goals and things we're doing in high school. So he'll be here on Friday, and he'll be meeting with us throughout the year to really help us focus on that goal. Dr. Dennis King is another consultant we work with. He was just here the other day, and he works with us through Solution Tree around professional learning communities. So the high school has done a lot of work around professional learning communities, and we're continuing that this year. We're making a lot of tremendous success with that. We're really looking forward to continuing that work with Solution Tree. And then the final goal, really focusing around at the high school, is the social emotional well-being, not only of our kids, but also of our staff. You know, if our staff are performing well, we also find that our kids perform well as well. So those are 4 goals that we're really working on this year at the high school. So obviously with our goals, everything we do ends with graduation rate. And so we want to just, if any of the teachers are here and Kevin's here and the rest of our staff, we talk about graduation rate quite often, probably more than like to hear from me about it, but it's that important. And this slide is showing almost many of our faculty meetings. On the left-hand side, just shows the improvement the high school's had since the 2016-2017 year, where we ended this last school year at a 78.1% graduation rate, which we are very proud of. And our goal this year is to hit and or break 80%, which my understanding has been done in quite some time. So we're hopeful that will happen. So although we are thrilled by the progress we've made, it used to be that the graduation rate for the state average was at 80%. So we're really excited about that. But as years have gone on, you can see our state average has jumped to 6.1%. So we have some more work to do. We recognize that, we're honest about that. But you can see the tremendous progress that the kids have made, both and the staff have really made. It's important that we talk about that because the staff have, through our consultants coming in, through the professional communities, through our culture responsive teaching, the staff hasn't really increased their instructional strategies, and therefore we're seeing our kids perform at higher levels. We also take a look really just at what are we doing in the building, right? What interventions we put in, what are their strategies we put in that we're not doing? So we've spent some time really adapting and changing some of those things, whether that's part of our master schedule or some of the other things we're going to talk about in a minute. So this year, we really focused off the year strong on our safety and our belonging obviously being part of our district mission. And we believe that safety and belonging go hand in hand, because if we think in order for you to feel safe, you have to feel like you belong, and vice versa. I think they're very synonymous. So just a couple of things on the left and the right that we've done that we currently have in our building. Some things I think just important to highlight. We have spent a lot of time and energy updating our exterior cameras that now attach to door alarms. So in our high school, every single exterior door is alarmed. So any door during the day, except for the 2 minutes the door is open, an alarm goes off. And then one of our school safety go to that area to see why or who left. Interesting enough, the people that are going out the wrong doors all day long, not our kids, the staff. So we're still working on that. But interesting enough, we have found that since we put door alarms in, it has almost stopped our kids from leaving out exterior doors except for the main doors. I'm saying almost. Every now and then we have 1 or 2 kids that try to get out. But the way our system works is that the door opens, a camera zooms in on that person, so exactly who is leaving and at what time, then we can address that student at a later time when they return to campus. So it's really been a great, excuse me, it's really deterred a lot of our students from leaving outside doors and making sure that we're using that single point of entry. The other thing we did, which was a large difference in us this year, and I really have to thank Ms. Adams for being a part of this. We brought in a lot of new training for all of our school safety district-wide, which was really awesome. We've always done some pockets of training, but this was much more formalized this year, and really talked with our students, with our staff about de-escalating techniques. That was really the focal point of all that. So that when our staff are responding to a situation, hopefully that they're a face that the kids know, and majority of our school safety were returning, so they knew that very well. But also just that extra layer, really, of de-escalation. So you can see on the left side, just a lot of things that we did this year that really involve safety. Some of them also did slightly different this year with orientation room. So every year, this kids get their schedule the first day of school, except this year we expanded to over an hour. And we did during that time was just talking expectations for the school year, what we want to see from our kids, teaching those positive behaviors. That was something slightly new that we did. We normally typically wait for a couple weeks in or a month in. We do gradable assemblies. We decided not to do that this year. We really do it the first moment, the first day of the school. So all kids do when they walked in, what was expected of them. On this side, I kind of put more of the belonging type activities that we have done. And excuse me, you can see that a lot of these things are things that are in our goals and things we've done previously. A couple of things I'm going to highlight for you, just to show that we really are moving forward with our belonging. We had a homecoming dance this year. We average for homecoming dances typically between 200 to 300 students at most. Usually we sell about 300 tickets and about 200 kids showed up. This year we sold 600 tickets and 500 students showed up. So I had a bit of a heart attack prior to that, making sure that we were staffed and we had enough food and everything, which we did. It was a great night, absolutely phenomenal night. But I think it just shows our students, or it shows our community that our students really do feel like they belong in our school and want to attend. And attending this activity such as the homecoming dance, we've never had those numbers ever. And of course, many students will say, well, why can't we bring dates? Well, that's the reason, because I can't have over 1,000 people in a gym, and maybe for other, more formal dances we can. But I just thought that was something to highlight because it really shows our students are really feeling they belong in our building and really felt welcome back. We had a great pep rally this year. We're hoping to do 2 more this year, 1 for each season. We also have some new cafeteria furniture coming in, which will highlight our Patriots logo and our B logo we're excited about. We have a new therapy dog that comes to our building once a week. We've had therapy dogs that have come in through organizations. We actually have one from a teacher now, which I know many of the buildings have. We're trying to add to that, so we have that. And then the final thing, which I'm going to turn over to Ms. Pendergrass in a minute, is our new PATS program. I'm not going to talk too much about that because she's going to spend the second half of this really going through that. But before I do turn over to her, I just want to give you some data. This data was as of October 4th. So our enrollment data, which is pretty similar to what it's been. Our average daily attendance, so it's as of 10/4 this time last year, we're up 2.1% in our average daily attendance. So we want to keep that going up, which is great. It means more and more kids are showing up. Our chronic absences, we are down 9.8% from this time last year. That's huge. Almost 10% of our kids that maybe in years past weren't showing up to regular school on a regular basis we were continuing to see that go down. Our out-of-school suspension rate, we're also down 1%. We had 1%, we're down 1.7%. And our in-school suspension rate went up 0.3%. So although I'm not thrilled our in-school suspension went up 0.3%, we are seeing a decline in overall instances, and we're also obviously seeing a decline in the out-of-school, which shows me that some of the instances that we're dealing with are more of that low-level stuff, not that tier 3 that we typically were dealing with in years past. So now I'm going to turn over to Ms. Pendergrass to talk a little bit about our PATS program and some of the awesome things they're doing with their staff in that program.
Hi, my name is Angela Pendergrass. I am super excited to be here as the new Dean of Students for our very awesome PATS program at Binghamton High School. PATS stands for Patriots Aspiring to Succeed. This is our crew here after our first community building activity in September. We did good old-fashioned relay races at Binghamton High School and then surprised the kids with the ice cream truck, which they thought they were too cool for, but then got very excited about it. So after we burned our calories, we deserted the ice cream afterwards. Let's see. So a little bit about the PATS program. The idea of the PATS program is not new, but we have a very nice 2022 twist on it. We have a lot of hopes and dreams of what this program can turn into. It's very new, getting off its feet. We're only in October so far. So I'm just going to share some of the basics with you and then tell you about some of our hopes and dreams too. We're located on the 2nd floor of the D building at Binghamton High School, so we have our own location. Our goal of the PATS program is to help students have a successful beginning to their high school career. We acknowledge that sometimes a large inner city school building is not everybody's cup of tea. That can bring on a lot of anxiety and a lot of fears for our students, especially in our COVID world that students spent time at home and now they have to walk back into this very large high school. So we provide a smaller setting for students. We are also, again, talking to them right off the bat about what is your track. You will graduate on time. You are a PATS student. We will have you on track. So when you leave the PATS program at the end of your 10th grade year, you are picking and eligible for whatever pathway you want. Rather than having those conversations later on in 11th and 12th grade, we're having those conversations right off the bat with our students. So through the program, we hope that students will be able to understand the importance of their education and work towards graduating on time. So when you get into a new position, sometimes you have, the luxury of like things being handed to you. So when I was hired as Dean of Students, I was given a list of students who were referred for the program. And I was told that the pass criteria is that we're looking for our students who are like middle of the road students. They have a 60% attendance rate for attending school. They're passing the majority of their classes, and they have less than 10 referrals for the school year. So when I came into the program, I already had the recommendations coming from East Middle School and West Middle School, which was super helpful. We hit the ground running and made calls all summer long, trying to recruit students for the program. And then I went to freshman orientation and recruited, and I'll tell you, my phone was ringing off the hook after those 2 days of freshman orientation. We had parents, students, people just saying, hey, we want to be a part of this. This sounds awesome. Sure.
So I just want to talk about the criteria. That's not a hard criteria, meaning that if you're not in that, we're not allowing you into the program. We just had to start from somewhere. So that's kind of where we came from. The reason we came with those numbers really had to do with this idea that we wanted to get students who do come to school, right? If we have a student who's never showing up, we don't want them to take a slot in the program. We also want it to be that the students are academically focused, meaning that, again, they're here, they're not always here. When they're here, they do well in class, and maybe not the best of students. Recognizing that a little more support would help that group. And the final referrals, the whole idea of less than 10 referrals, although it's not 11 or 12 doesn't exclude them from it, the whole idea was that this was not a behavioral program. I just want to be really clear on that. This is a program that was created for students that we're trying to teach the value of education and really making sure that it's not just that we're responding to issues all day long. We do have behavioral issues still, which is going to come with any new program. But I just want to clarify that because when I see that, I just want to get us to recognize that's just kind of a starting point, not necessarily a hard, you have to have this in order to be in this program.
We are currently at 42 students in our program. We have 32 ninth graders. Remember, I went to freshman orientation and got a lot of ninth graders. And then we are at 10 10th graders. So right now we're capped at ninth graders. We have a large portion of ninth graders, and we're currently trying to recruit some more 10th graders. The good news about this is when we have the program next year, the students, our freshmen, have made a 2-year commitment to the program. So those 32 freshmen are rolling over into the program again for their sophomore year, and at the end of next school year, I'll be recruiting 30 more freshmen, incoming freshmen. So another awesome thing about PATS is that we have a dedicated staff to the program. I am very proudly overseeing as the Dean of Students, kind of the administrator overseeing things. We have our own guidance counselor whose office is right in the D building with us. Their caseload is for PATS students. We have 4 core academic teachers who are just dedicated to teaching the PATS students. And then we have a special ed teacher with a caseload of students with IEPs who are in the program. This is the staff at open house night. We had a t-shirt making contest. The students made t-shirts, we chose one, and we proudly wore a t-shirt made by one of our students. Shout out to Mr. Pierpoli and Mr. Miller, who are here from the PATS program as well tonight. We are already a great little family over in the D building. So what a PATS day looks like for our students start and end the day with us. So periods 1, 2, 3, 8, and 9 are periods where they're in the D building taking their academic courses. Our class sizes consist of 12 to 15 students, which is probably one of my best selling pieces for the program. Smaller class sizes, more individualized attention. For a lot of our students who have IEPs or 504s, we're already hitting those modifications and needs for them just by providing the small class sizes. Students go out, we say go out into the big building. That's what we call it. They go out into the big building for their electives, for PE, and for lunch. So periods 4, 5, 6, and some of them for period 7, they're out in the big building and then they return to us 8 and 9. We participate in monthly community building activities. We have a 9th period intervention period, which is where we work on either intervention for students, redoing lessons because you've missed things, making up work, extension lessons. That's where we build in a lot of our SEL time for social emotional learning. Something I did leave out too is we also have 2 foreign language teachers that push over during the day. So our students are offered Spanish and American Sign Language as well. So they have a choice of foreign language, which was really beneficial for them, and we were so proud to be able to give that to them. Just to end, this is an example of a student exit ticket in class. They were working on a writing skill, and they were giving them a prompt that was non-academic to practice. This exit ticket came from a student who had to be called and reminded that the school year had started and asked, like, we miss you, when are you gonna come and show up? They came, and the student happens to be a student that Mr. Miller sees on his caseload, and he checked in with mom once the school year had started and was going over IEP things, and mom said, I have never seen my child so excited about going to school. They actually said on the weekend, I wish it were Monday and during the week so I could go to school. Once they were reminded that the school year has started, they have not missed school since. And the prompt was, do you think BHS is a good school? They were not encouraged to answer either way. And this student wrote, BHS is a good school because the kids that need help get to go to their own side of the school. This is important because nobody will make fun of you when you need help because everybody needs help. So I just wanted to end on that note for you and share some of the great things that are going on in PATS. Thank you so much.
Any questions? Do you guys have any of the slides?
Kevin?
Yes, sir.
Not a question, but just some comments. Good luck, Angela, with the program.
Thank you.
As you well know, the research indicates these kinds of programs are very successful. We've done them before, and best wishes to you and your staff.
Thank you.
The students will graduate, hopefully, and more importantly, will be getting a very good education in a personalized way. I would also like to compliment Kevin, the principal. Very nice balance between the physical safety measures at Binghamton High School and the psychological safety supports. We've got to have both, and they're in there. We're hearing that across the community that the children feel that there's good school spirit, that they belong. It's one of our mission statements there, and things are coming along. So that important balance is there. We see that. It's not just lots of physical measures for safety, but also the psychological safety supports. That's a compliment to you and the staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna start speaking
Speak
because
so I
I
can
raise
hear
my
you.
hand and you speak.
So I
That's
can-
okay. That's okay. I'll talk like that.
Okay.
Hello. So thank you for the presentation. I just had a few questions about that same slide Dr. Penna was just talking about. Can you talk about SafeScan with Southern Tier?
SafeScan is the machine that we have in the building when students
Okay.
enter.
Why does it say with Southern Tier? What does that
Sure.
mean?
Let me explain. Okay. So the reason I put that on there, as you're aware, we have a SafeScan machine where students enter in. In order for that machine to function, you have to have a supporting staff. Right? So we have a contract with the Southern Tier Security Company. So that is what I would say Southern Tier. I ran out of room for a security company. That's what Southern Tier. So I wrote that on there because truthfully, that machine cannot function without the support of additional staff members. So that's why I thought it was important to put that in there. And I also would point out too, Corinne, the training that we gave all of our school safety, the Southern Tier gentlemen also were part of that training.
And then my second question with the SROs, those timeframes, is that like 7:30 to 6? And then what's the 2 to 4?
Yep. So we've added an additional slot. Brad is in the back there actually, comes over at 2 o'clock. We found that our dismissal time was an area we need to have more support in, lately just for traffic purposes. So Brad comes over from 2 to 4, and he's at our dismissal. So in addition to Officer Williams, who's there from 7:30 to 6 o'clock, we have an additional SRO that's just there at dismissal time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed your presentation. All the progress you've made over there this year.
Wait, I have one last thing. Can I get an invite to the next pep rally?
Absolutely. It was funny, you saw the pictures.
I saw the pictures and I was jealous.
Yes, we'll have you all attend. I can even call you guys out and announce you all, and,
Well, no.
no, we can do that, not a problem, we'll take care of that for you.
You asked for it.
You asked, I'm gonna-
I need attention.
Okay, finishing that section, we'll move on to our next section of the agenda. And if I could, what I'd like to be able to do is move the facility study presentation next in line. So can I get a motion to change the agenda, please?
Motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you very much. So next on the agenda, we're going to present where we stand with the feasibility study update, which will basically provide the board with an opportunity to discuss the information that was provided during the forums that were held across the city. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Allen. So as you're aware, and I thank the board for their engagement in our community forums that we held in September and October. In the community, we tried to place them within community settings, and we had not hit the southern side of the city with our schools, and so we had one MacArthur. There were about 80.
It's on now.
Is that?
It like slowly turned on.
Yeah, it's green. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay.
Okay, thanks. So we have about 80 across the city, across the 4 forums attend. The structure was such that we gave a brief overview. There were lots of handouts, information we'd already previously shared with the community, and we had 3 stations. One of the stations was focused on opportunities and challenges with looking at feasibility studies at elementary level in terms of impact on student learning. Another section was on the actual facilities conditions, and so opportunity for individuals to have conversations and ask questions and dialogue around the facilities. And then there was another on just student enrollment overall and asking questions about that data as well as what it looks like and things that we have or had not considered yet. And so individuals are able to move from one group to the next after kind of facilitating the movement to make sure our time was being utilized well. And so what I'm about to share with you is their feedback across all 4 sessions. And so it's verbatim as we recorded it on the chart, and I'll have some Q&A to also share with you tonight. So input on changing the use of our elementary buildings, just that idea and its impact on our students. So the community wants the board collectively to be aware of considerations being made and making sure that we're making those with student needs in mind, special needs in mind. So what would impact be on the self-contained classrooms or impact on students with IEPs or private floor plans, and how does changing in our building configuration impact those? More details about possible community centers. And so someone in the community talked about, if we're gonna repurpose a building, what could that look like, just continue to support a community? Could it be a community center, just positing that as a thought and idea. But also at the same time, taking a building and repurposing it from a school to something other than a school, how will that impact our community in a particular zone? So the statement concerns that closing would destroy that community in which they are currently located. Also concerns that the most disenfranchised students might be most impacted by the decision. So thinking again about student population, any particular building, and thinking about the buildings that we're looking at and considering. Fewer walkers and students being dropped off equals less family interactions within the school. So right now, if you go to our schools, any of our elementary schools, in the morning you will see parents either driving their child to school or walking their child to school, so they're very present. I think back in my days in the pre-K, one of the advantages of pre-kindergarten was, and disadvantage was, we didn't provide transportation, but that also meant that every parent who came or a family member who came in the morning, we would greet, and then also another family member contact most often at the end. So with fewer walkers and students being dropped off, is that going to impact the degree to which will that impact the family interactions on a daily basis, and not only between the school and the families, but also between families and families. So that may be the one opportunity to get to meet or see a child's friend's family, because they're also going to school. And also will impact the walkers in terms of if they become ill. And so if they're ill, is the parent able to walk to the school to pick up that child, or if they're now located in a different place in the city, what degree can that parent or family member get to that school to pick them up if they're sick? Redistricting impacts not only those moving to new schools, but also impacts the schools that will remain open. So if we recall in our discussions over the past year, we've talked about if this school is to be repurposed through the transportation study, where would certain students be relocating? And so some schools will be absorbing more students than others. And so while, for example, MacArthur is not part of the large conversation, there are some scenarios that will impact MacArthur in terms of redistricting. Same thing with Calvin Coolidge. While it's not a school that's looking like it's going to be repurposed, it could be very impacted by a decision made by the board. So be thinking about that as well as the decision. Negative impact on student attendance could result when school distance to school is increased. So thinking about our attendance rates just for the high school, while they're improving this year, I think as we're coming off officially from the first year after COVID, we still have a long way to go to get an average daily attendance up to 95%. Currently, we're at 90.1 as a district. So is this going to exacerbate a problem that we're trying to address? And also consider the disruption to the students, the staff, the families when considering closing the school. Impact on staff morale should also be considered. So what does that mean to everyone in that school community that when the decision is made? Social emotional connections are more important than less shared staff or new performance spaces. And so this is a comment made by a community member in terms of the value set. Like, think about what really impacts our students on a daily basis, and if our current configurations of supporting social emotional needs, how would it change to increase another value set impact that social emotional status? There's a cohort of students who started the school during COVID that could be impacted by this decision, and then again, potentially, if we make a 6-12 decision. Again, the board gave me the directive following the community forums to then start the 6-12 study group, because they were looking at changing buildings, repurposing buildings, and maybe looking at some other opportunities there. There's a lot of transition for these students, consider how the transitions will impact their achievement. And so if you think about in 2019-20, our kindergartners at that time, right, are now second graders. And so I'll keep bringing this back up to the board for our awareness. Any potential, any decision, any potential change, think about where those second graders are who've already had a rough start to their elementary education. What could a change in the building for those current second graders mean to them, and how can we be super sensitive? We should be super sensitive to that. Planning for additional social emotional support for any transitions. And I mentioned this earlier in discussions when we had the flood at MacArthur, and in 1 week's time had to reallocate students for several years, and then bring those some of those very same students back together. We had to be very thoughtful about what the impact of not taking transportation that they didn't have to take before was on those students, for as an example, or not being with a sibling where they had used to be being with that sibling if they were in first grade and the sibling was in third or fourth grade. And so the district has been, and the Board of Education has been very supportive of adding social emotional supports. We're just looking at that data for answering our question. Over the past 6 years, we've invested $6.2 million on last year alone. And that 1 year, we added an additional $500,000 in more social workers and programs like we have at the high school that you heard about earlier. Consider the impact of neighborhoods of going from 7 to 6 schools. Don't consider decisions regarding school configuration in a vacuum. Issues around homeownership, student housing could be exacerbated. So what could changing our configurations, how might that impact spaces where we're trying to get families to move into and not turn into student housing? Will families flee, and then will that be adding more student housing than kind of exacerbating that? And then walkability for schools is a major plus. And so thinking about communities in this region, and you think about other school districts, go to other districts and how many of them have walkable communities, meaning sidewalks, and maybe families come to Binghamton to buy a home or to live in this area because they can walk to a grocery store or walk to the school or just run on the sidewalk and not have to be walking and exercising outside where there are no sidewalks. And there were many comments specific to Roosevelt through the 4 community groups. And so I felt compelled to have a slide just on Roosevelt because they were very specific, although some of these things I'm going to say may translate to other situations. So again, consider the community costs of closing Roosevelt in particular. Roosevelt Elementary School has a Teddy Bear Clinic, and so it's providing a great resource for families, both for physical health as well as mental health. Medical care that students can access at Roosevelt is a significant resource for these families. I'll reference this now, but on the frequently asked questions to the four community meetings, as well as the ones earlier in the spring, a specific question was asked: what would happen if Roosevelt would be repurposed? What would happen with the Teddy Bear Clinic? And so just to give a quick little history on that, Teddy Bear Clinic came in, it's actually supported by United Health Services, and it's remained there, and the United Health Services system recognizes that as a hub for healthcare. And I point that out because we've tried to seek out other additional, I'll take Helen Coolidge, for example. Let's put a healthcare center there for those families. Well, across the street is the Lourdes Walking Clinic. So Lourdes would not, and then down the street is a healthcare clinic from UHS. So neither of those organizations would look to put a healthcare center. We've tried because of where they've already posited different healthcares. And unfortunately, in that side of town, UHS used to have one in Kirkwood. It closed and they moved to the east side. So with Roosevelt, I don't know the specific answer to that in terms of if that building was repurposed. Certainly, if it was to be rebuilt, we could still maintain the integrity of the site there. But repurposing doesn't necessarily mean moving with those students because we'd have to look at the other schools to see between UHS and Lourdes, where would they be able to support one? Because they can't have one right next to an existing walking clinic. Because it's the resources there already for the community. Food desert on the north side already negatively impacts Roosevelt students. And so there's lots of conversations around, we already have a food desert that's trying to be addressed. And then if you bring a school out of that community, that also provides food at time for impacts for families or those children immediately, but also from other organizations, is that exacerbating that, but also it's another community resource not currently in that side of that section of town. Building would be moving from minimal transportation to full transportation. So when we talked about the transportation study, this one building currently, the walkers, and in the transportation study, it was realized that it would, while on one hand, it would require no additional buses because there are existing bus structure to absorb the students that are in that area to different schools. On the other hand, you're taking a whole school of nearly 400 students who had not experienced busing before and having them being bused. And so that a big change shift for the families as well as for the students. Equity concerns when closing the most diverse school in the district. While we have diverse schools across the district, there is a continuum of poverty that ranges from 65% all the way up to 85, 90%, actually 95%. And so that range is pretty broad across our community, and this particular school is at the upper end of socioeconomic status. Roosevelt has, there's more poverty. And again, Roosevelt's the hub of the north side, kind of referencing the other elements here, but not only for educating our students, but what are the other things that happens in that building and how it supports families. We have a lot of community partners that work through the Lee Varda Center, and they extend those services over to Roosevelt Elementary School. The school district has the opportunity to uplift and validate the north side by valuing Roosevelt, was a statement. A rebuilt Roosevelt could be designed to house and support significant community programs. So we're going to go back in time when MacArthur was intact before the flood. But in the back of MacArthur, there's a huge sign that said community schools. And in that location and in that building, we had an Even Start program, which served teen moms, and they would bring their children into the school setting to be educated and finish their degree. We had the PAC program was located there, Parent Children Together. Mary Haas led that initiative. When MacArthur flooded and was rebuilt, it was a decision at that time of the district to not maintain that community schools aspect. As a matter of fact, Special Services was there. They relocated to 98 Oak Street. So this is advocating that whatever we do here, that we look at this and think of it from the vantage point of not just rebuilding, but rebuilding and uplifting and increasing access to services that are needed on that side of town. And Roosevelt is only one of three, has pre-K with an E&L, so I think they're emphasizing that as a resource for the district. They have the combination of pre-kindergarten along with E&L programming, so we cluster those programs currently. MacArthur was valued and rebuilt, and the feeling is Roosevelt should have that same value. Although as we discussed in the community forum, there are different reasons for those rebuilds, right? One was not at our discretion, if you will, it was out of necessity, but I think their point was that, well, this building is also in need. While it's not a natural disaster, that's happening to making the building unavailable. The condition of the building is making it increasingly unavailable. Access to parents and families to schools and events would negatively impact the north side of town. I know under Mr. Schultz's leadership, they've tried walking school buses to try to gather families and connect them to the school. And if you were over there at dismissal, you will see many families, members of families or friends of families there picking up students. And again, just kind of emphasizing that point made earlier in the slide, that this is the opportunity to have those one-on-one connections with teachers and their students and their families, as well as the leadership of the building. And another statement that was made of all the schools Roosevelt should have has had steady enrollment due to the accessible housing complexes. So, thinking about where some of our subsidized housing is, and also some of the growth in some of the apartments complexes that are there. If you look at the trajectory or the trend data for this particular elementary building, it has fairly remained steady. It's dipped a little bit, but it's remained steady. We're growing during some period of years. Now I'm going to shift to the other group, which was comments. Again, everybody who came, those 80 individuals, rotated among all these groups regarding class and building sizes, use and/or configurations of our buildings. So there was a group of individuals who were emphasizing that small classes are a superpower. It's a major draw. So families looking to move into districts, different districts from outside the school or even one district to the next, recognize very quickly at the elementary level that our class sizes in general across the district are significantly lower than our counterparts in the region. Ensure the class size data being used is accurate throughout the year, not just the beginning of the year. And so I'm going to show you a slide a little bit later with a frequently asked questions. The question was asked, why are you only looking at one point of the year? Well, the reason we do that is that's the validated data that we use on Beds Day, that we go through a process to ensure this is our number we're reporting to state ed. It's also the publicly available number, so we don't want to put numbers out there that the public couldn't actually look at and compare. But our enrollment actually does not vary. It's down a little bit actually as the year goes on, and then it kind of comes back up over the summer, and then the next year it kind of goes down. I'll show you the data that supports it. So really, we have to pick one time that the Beds Day, which is in October, is the best time to do that. Variation exists between grades in buildings across the district, and it appears the numbers of buildings would not matter. So the idea here is that if all first grade classrooms are lower than all fourth grade classrooms, what difference would it make if we had 7 buildings versus 6? Kind of thing. And the difference is the numbers of sections. We went through a process in this particular group, meaning that there are some places where it's hard to collapse. If you have 2 classes, you're not going to do that, but if they keep getting smaller, if you close the building and now there are 3, it can level out the inequity in that particular building in terms of class sizes. Opportunity to redraw district lines for schools as populations have shifted. So this was a great nugget, I would say, or a thought and long conversation in 2 different groups, 2 different nights, that the public came and said, have you considered redistricting? That's happened in this district. We talked at the group around this building, Columbus, right, at one time housing our students. And when it was decided to close, the elementary students that were in this building, surrounding directly this building, then went to MacArthur. That was terribly long ago. I believe it was in the early 90s, 80s when that happened. So, they redistrict at that time. But could we look at the district and look at some of the buildings that have higher numbers and buildings that have lower numbers, and is there ways to redistrict to level out that populations so that it would still not be terribly far from where their neighborhoods are necessarily, but could go to other schools and provide that. So that is something that we could consider when we bring that up when we, next month when we talk about opportunities. Planning Commission, what are the, new bills in the city has recently announced that may impact future enrollments. And so the city has announced some mid-range 1 to 2 bedroom apartments that will be coming into the community. We have not found, in terms of access for our families, that they've been affordable housing. But however, those young professionals who are taking on those housings potentially could buy homes in our area and have their own family and remain in our community. So I think in terms of that impacting our enrollment down the line, certainly has the potential to do that. Is the 1.5 million saved worth the changes in class size? Is a question that was posed. That 1.5 million is the estimated savings. It also represents around 4% of the tax levy. So when we talk about where we generate our funds for supporting the district, that would be one vote in terms of its ratio. The class size number may advantage addressing mental health and special needs. So again, asking that question, if you have 10 or 11 students in a classroom versus 16 or 17, how does that impact the mental health support or environment with the students? Also taking consideration of demographic distribution, families moving in and out. If you look at looking at our district enrollment, we have become more stable as we have decreased in size. So when we were larger, about 10 years ago, we had school elementary buildings that were as mobile as 70%, which meant that, within a class, 70% of those students were not the same students by the end of that year. Now our mobility rates are lower, around close to 30% in some of those same buildings, but this building size has decreased. So what that tells us in district, as we looked at this data, is that we used to have a higher mobility rate because families were coming in for about 3 months, living in an apartment. Well, the first month was, we found one. Second month was not quite liking this. Third month was, we need to find another location. We look at residencies that had high turnover rates, and that's what was creating and contributing significantly to our mobility. Careful look at the enrollment as related to COVID, in particular the numbers of newborns during 2021 and 22 years, the result of staying inside more often. So the group called them quote unquote COVID babies. Are we going to see a population boom from being more isolated or staying within families? I don't know the answer to that, but that's just be thinking about that. We're going to 4 or 5 years from now, so we should be looking at the newborn rates that released by the health department at the end of every year. Babies born in this the county, and I think you can look at it from zip code. These were they were last living when they had their child. Class size changes for some 11 to 12 to 15, 16 may impact the teacher staff retention. So in other words, teaching in a space where you have 11 or 12 students and then the next year having more students, 15 or 16, will that dissuade people from staying within the district? Class size is a factor, but appropriate adult support in rooms needs to remain intact. And so I think this is a call out for, making sure that we maintain our aid to student to teacher ratios. If you recall, we were having a crisis in terms of losing potential income under our previous governor, threats of major reductions. We had to look at our aid support in our kindergarten classrooms, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. We've now since then brought back our aids largely into those spaces. So that's the call out that we start to change, make sure that those ratios maintain in terms of where those aids are located. Decreases in enrollment in specific buildings, and then this quote, Wilson and Mann have been impacted by college student housing. So recently, the city announced locations where student housing could take place. Unfortunately, that increased the footprint where student housing can take place. And so I think this is just a comment that was made, but maybe a planting a seed to say, how can that be addressed? So that we're not taking away homes from potential families living in the Binghamton, but, making, as opposed to increasing student housing access. Class sizes are not equitable. People should understand class sizes of 10 and 11 are not typical. There are more schools on the west side than the other side of town. Should we consider looking at schools on the west side? And we are. So that's the answer to that. I think this person was making that statement more than a question or inquiry. And again, these are individuals from feedback from the smaller sessions. Parents don't care about the state-of-the-art buildings. They want community schools, mental health, social emotional support. So I think this was an advocacy for, if you're looking at this, they'd rather have the resources that exist going into supporting the mental health and physical health of our students, and not having a facility that may be able to provide for rehearsal spaces and performance spaces and cafeterias that can hold individuals. Beware of putting too much emphasis on facilities over the relationships that exist in smaller buildings. And I think this goes back to that walkability in terms of getting to know our students and families, because we're able to see them. So just thinking about those two things. Even more, with more buses, more parents may opt to transport their own students. So right now, they may be walking to school, and if they go to another school, they may not take advantage of the transportation, but they may decide, you know what, I'll drive you to school. So thinking about our schools and morning drop-off and pickup, how could this dissemination from 7 schools to 6 schools impact the pickup and drop-off of cars, right, moving within that space? For some of our buildings, that's a challenge now, significantly exacerbate that. Even with more busing, additional buses will only increase the stop arm violations and the dangers associated with it. Facilities and shiny objects don't make the school, but people do. That was emphasized across every community that we met with. Concerns over property values. So the thought here was that, will the value of my home be impacted by having a school there? Right? And so I think there was some thoughts that when MacArthur flooded, and then it was announced we were going to be rebuilding it, interest in people buying homes, thinking that the value of those homes might go up because people want to move into homes because their children will be going to a brand new school. So how does that impact our decision making? Impact on building conditions and transportation. So Man and Jefferson have no green space, but they still have neighborhood schools. This is a comment made through they were sharing, like, these are the physical plots of our school buildings and their location. Consider, and I always argue, but also emphasize that, well, just Jefferson may not have any green spaces within walking distance of a park, and of course, Man highly uses rec park, which is considered part of their home and their plot. Consider the negative experiences that comes with having to ride a school bus. Consider all the aspects related to the equity of redistricting, what is lost and what is gained. So making sure that we maintain that understanding. 21st century schools do not have to include bells and whistles. Health and safety should be a priority. Consider the impact of transportation on quality of life. So again, really concerned with being on a bus. Now in Binghamton, our elementary schools go first in the morning, and then they have to go pick up the runs for the same bus, pick up middle schools. And that's why we start elementary at 7:50 and middle school a half hour later. So we have to have at least a half hour time period between the pickup and for one and drop off and pick up. So just so, because we all may have different experiences growing up riding a bus to school, our rural schools, which are 120 square miles, some of those kids are on buses for an hour and a half. Right? A typical ride at Binghamton is less than that half an hour because they have to get to one location to the next. After school activities will suffer. Families who don't have transportation currently would not necessarily go to another school that's in another location. So how would we accommodate that? Could we accommodate that? Is that going to make a difference for our families if they don't see their school as part of the neighborhood? So also during the sessions, there were several questions that were asked that we either didn't have the opportunity to have the expertise in the room to answer, or we said, no, that's a great question, we answered it, but we wanted to include it for the larger conversation. So it wasn't asked as a statement, which most of those are, but rather it was asked as a question. So the document I'm going to share right now is posted to our website, so it has a lot of questions and answers there. I'm not going to read all the questions, there's about 30 questions there, but I am just going to go over to this side of the room and just highlight some of the pieces that are there. They were questions that were not only asked, they were all the questions that were asked during the fall community forums, but I would also say that when we had conversations, the 4 conversations in June, and there were many comments coming to the mic, many of the same statements and questions were also asked then. So I don't think there was, with the exception of, have you considered redistricting to address the class size distribution? And that, the exception of that, that was the first time we really heard about that as a potential solution. Much of this has been shared earlier, but I would say re-emphasized with a lot of passion and commitment for making sure that we make this best decision for our students, families, and our faculty and staff. So let me just go over here for a moment. Oh, one second. Oh, thanks. Sorry. Appreciate it. Okay, so we can scroll, but I can't. Let's see, how does the possibility of closing the school meet the needs of all students? And so this just speaks to the purpose and responsibility of the Board of Education in terms of ensuring that we are being fiscally minded and that we are providing the best facilities for our community. Which of the 4 or more buildings would be made viable daycare centers, or some conversation about, well, if this building was to be repurposed, maybe it could still serve our students, but differently in that birth through age 5. So while we're not making any assumptions or propositions of any one or the other, I would say that in order to do that, that wouldn't be the Binghamton City School District doing that would be a third party, and primarily because it's not governed by the New York State Department of Education. It's governed by the Office of Family and Children's Services. So just like Family Enrichment Network would be a potential third party that could come in and help facilitate that. But that would not be a thing that we would be able to do. And it does undergo other regulations and does require other facilities adjustments. All doable, but just would not be something that the district would do. Has the long-term strategic impact of changes to our current building configurations been explored? The long-term here is 10 years. We talked with our consultants and we said, can you go out 20? They advised that that's not solid. As you move beyond 10 years, the data then become as trustworthy because when they have the census every 10 years, because of all the other variables that could potentially impact it, some of which were mentioned tonight. What plans does the district consider to address the disruption that will occur moving students from one school to another at any point during the elementary career? And so during one of the evenings, I had a great conversation with some parents around different options to do this. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to understand, first of all, what decisions would be made and what buildings and numbers of students and all that. But I gave one example of, we can make that announcement the following year, even though the whole building wasn't ready to move, you could just have no new incoming kindergarten students or no new students enrolled in that building that year, right? So nobody's disrupted, it would be new whether it's that building that they're supposed to go to or not. And you could scaffold that off so that those second graders I was talking about that we need to be hyper, sensitive to, may not ever have to leave that building, they would just naturally move through that building, right, until their middle school and we're just going to be replacing those grade levels. That's one potential. There are probably a dozen others, but we would engage in community conversations and about different options. Indeed, we were in that place to understand that. And just in small conversations that I had, there was a sense of relief that this was going to just be, okay, 3 months from now, this is going to take place, and what does that mean for families? What happens if the schools close and population shifts towards the remaining 6 neighborhood schools? So the board has discussed these scenarios, which I'll repost in just a moment, and looked at this from a short-term and a long-term capacity, additional capacity. Remember, the scenarios we're looking at is looking at having our buildings at 85%, not at 100%. Okay, so in other words, not every class is gonna be at 18, 20. It's 85% of that is what would occur, by redistributing, those buildings we're looking at. But the reason, the other piece of this would be, any building that would be repurposing, that it would be repurposed in a way that also could be reassumed by the school district. So again, Columbus is a great example. Columbus exited the students, then went to the county, they had county services for a long time. And then the district decided in around 1999, 2000, to take this building back and rent to BOCES on the first 2 floors and bring central office from 98 Oak Street over to this building. I believe that's around the correct time frame, right? Would community use space be available if the school closes? The answer would be maybe, and the reason it's maybe, if we're looking at the 4 buildings, the 3 buildings that, Horseman, TJ, and Woodrow Wilson, yeah, the answer would be generally yes. Roosevelt Elementary School in its current condition, if we were no longer using it for our students in its current condition, wouldn't be able to just be rented because it would become unsafe over time. That having said that, you already heard me talk about rebuilding it. We could be thinking about additional space for our community. What does the data look like on home teaching resident students attending private non-public schools? And this was brought up because of the question, are there kids out there that aren't coming to our school? And is that increase in time, and are we going to get those kids back because of COVID? Are more students leave us during COVID because they wanted to be in school, appropriate for in person and we were remote, that kind of thing. And in actual, I pulled the data from 2017, 18, 18, 19, I left the COVID years out, not to confuse the data, and then jumped to this particular year. And actually the numbers of students by grade levels has decreased over time in terms of going to private or parochial schools. So if you just scroll down there, Don, the data's there. So across the grade level, it's around 20, 25. I'm averaging broadly. Okay, you can go on down. Another question asked was, would expanding the need for more transportation exacerbate busing issues? Again, it depends on what scenario you look at. The scenarios range from needing no additional buses to needing 4 additional buses. There is a national regional bus driver shortage. Our first students were looking at some out of the box kind of thinking with bringing vans on board so that the CDL license isn't needed, but rather we have general licenses to help some of the smaller runs take place, which would give us increased access to more current buses. Can the board define 21st century schools? That keeps coming up, and that has been mentioned in several of the other presentations. And so, here's a broad description, and really what it comes down to is we're providing a facility and program that's responsive to changes in technology, economy, needs of this community. We have been very responsive in technology. We'll say that in terms of our wireless and one-to-one initiative with our existing schools, but what are the needs of its community, of the community, and so what does that mean? But also looking at our spaces and our buildings that were built, we sit differently than any other district in this region because we were one of the first school districts in the region. And so our buildings, several of them were built in 1900, 1903, 1904. And so their configurations in terms of class sizes were under a different standard than today. And quite frankly, they were small. And so we were grandfathered into that by code. So when COVID hit, our Binghamton could not keep all students in the classroom being 3 to 6 feet distance. Our neighborhood schools, whose buildings were built in the 70s, they were able to because at that time class sizes were larger. And so we were negatively impacted. So the idea is, if this was to happen to us again, would we be able to accommodate that? And we wanted equity. So there were some buildings, MacArthur, where we might have been able to accommodate that, but it wouldn't have been fair to say, okay, if you live in the MacArthur Elementary School, your child can come every day. But if you live at another school in a school district, you can't come every day. You have to be remote. So the district looked at all those different configurations. What considerations have been given for additional social emotional learning? And we've shared that earlier in just a comment. We do take this very seriously, and we've onboarded last year an assessment called the Co-Vitality Assessment that gives us a sense of where students are on that continuum. We have a rich response intervention process and student support team process when students are demonstrating any behaviors that are giving us insight into needing additional help. And we continue to look at this. We have a large number of social workers per student in the region, as well as I believe high school and middle school guidance counselors. What's the data that shows the relationship between enrollment decline and family housing decline? And so this is from the census data. It's out there publicly. You can kind of look to see total housing units and how that's changed. And I did not, or I haven't even looked at the history as to why there were blips up and down. I'm sure that's can be accounted for different housing units coming and going within our city. And the second one is renters. How many are renter occupied? And the closer I get to occupied less than 35 years old, the reason that's on the slide went from 36% to 43%. Was trying to get a sense of those leases are, how old are the individuals in that space? And these college students, but less than 35 is only gives an insight to that. And then just our enrollment. So our enrollment decreased from 2,000. This is just at the elementary level. For 2010 was 2,810, and now it's at 2,239. So it has indeed decreased. Could the West Side consider a TK2 and a 3-5 building? This was taken into consideration with a larger stakeholder group, community group, and the consensus there was that not to look at that across the district because of adding that additional transition. So right now, students have 3 transitions from elementary to middle, 2 transitions, elementary to middle, high school. This would mean that students would go to one school for primary, and then intermediate for another, and then middle school, and then high school. I think this, though, was really pointing to, but could we do that just on the west side? And what might that reveal? The distribution of students might even out a bit for those 2 schools, but it's still going to be under enrolled in just that section of town for those 2 buildings. How does busing affect attendance for students, the school as well as families for after school functions? I don't have any strong data. I know in terms of family engagement, there's greater impact on changes made in buildings when there are fewer or more buses. But in terms of the district, we have conducted several studies where we look at to try to come up with solutions. Students, if you're a walker versus a busser, should we be focusing on walkers because they tend to miss more school? And actually the data didn't demonstrate that. It was pretty much even. But when you look at socioeconomic status, it was a stark difference. And so that means they can speak to access to cars, other members of or associated individuals who have access to cars. What's the cost of 15 student class size at the K-5 level? And so this question came up to say, okay, if we're trying to think about even distribution, could we get everybody at 15, right? So we have some classes right at 18 and at 20, currently around the district, and that's kind of the 85% of that. What would it cost today if we were just to say, okay, every class is going to have 15 or fewer students? That would mean an additional 20 elementary teachers across the district at a cost of $1.6 million, which is, again, about that 4% on the tax levy. Could future enrollment projections determine the decisions? That's what we based a lot of this on. We're basing a lot of this information on. And what's the current data for vehicles per family? So if you could just scroll down to the chart. So this is taken from the U.S. Census data and the U.S. From the American Community Survey, and the chart up there. And so I'll just highlight Jefferson, Wilson, Roosevelt, and Horace Mann. What this shows you is a total number of individuals, number of households in a particular census tract. This is not a perfect science because if you look at the census tracts that are there, some of them extend beyond a school area. But in general, if you look at it, you'll see how I clustered them together. So this is broad, but over on Thomas Jefferson, it looks like there's about 15% of households, doesn't say families, this is all households, so it doesn't mean that necessarily those households have children going to school. Don't have a vehicle. Woodrow Wilson's about 25, Theodore Roosevelt's about 34%, and then Horace Mann's 26%. those households that are not having a vehicle. What's the historical data that represents enrollment? I mentioned this earlier. You can see it doesn't matter what month. It's pretty consistent. Those are across multiple years. Meaning September's dark blue line looks very similar to February's dark blue line, which looks similar to June's dark blue line. And then how are the proposals maintaining outside playing green spaces? All the 5 proposals are looking at those green spaces similarly. And has there been consideration to having 4 buildings, redistricting lines, why are students at Beethoven going to Thomas Jefferson? So I don't know the history behind that. And probably one time when they drew the lines, there were very few students from Beethoven going to Thomas Jefferson. And but anyways, that's the referencing, could be just redistrict lines. Summer accessibility, how would that impact our community discipline? Does it differ K2 versus 3-5? And does it differ based on class sizes? It really does come down to relationships and the trauma experienced by our students. When we look at discipline issues, we've had discipline issues with incoming kindergarten, first and second years, which tend to have smaller class sizes right now. We've had discipline issues with third, fourth, and fifth. It really comes down to the individual levels. There's no necessarily patterns when you look at what the precipitating causes are of some of the behaviors. We're closing the school increase the squeeze on space for after school programs. That answer, no, we had after school programs in all of our elementaries in 7 schools when we were at really high capacity back in that 2,800 number. So, going down to the 2,200 number, going to 6 schools, it wouldn't impact after school programming. And then there were 4 questions specific to Roosevelt. How quick does the decision on Roosevelt need to be made? Why hasn't there been more investment in Roosevelt? How well is Roosevelt built with that regard to the asbestos? And so the physical structure is strong, meaning steel and brick. However, the asbestos was used in a way that was sprayed onto that brick and onto that steel. So the question remains the degree to which we can actually get that asbestos out of the material that the building was built. It is in dire need of repairs. It's not just paint in new tiles, those kinds of things. It's windows, it's bathrooms, bathroom fixtures. Each time anything is touched, because the spray on asbestos was sprayed onto the building and built onto it. So I know that 6 or 7 years ago, the architects and our facilities consultants were telling us that Roosevelt had maybe a little bit larger than 10 years time span, because these other things are going to need to be replaced. So it's the windows closing in on making a decision. That's when there's an urgency around that. Has a temporary location for Roosevelt been found within the current boundaries? I think this question was related to a lot of conversation around, okay, so if you need to rebuild it, what's going to happen to the faculty and staff during that rebuild? Can you find space? Can we bring in trailers? Can we do those kinds of things? The Roosevelt that we've mentioned before, the original Roosevelt was on the opposite side on that large green space. And when that happened, the individual stayed in the old Roosevelt while the new Roosevelt was being built, and then the other one was torn down. Could that happen? It might be able to happen. It's going to depend a lot on the asbestos abatement. It will depend a lot on the noise level and the traffic that gets increased over there, and our ability to maintain education for those students. Can it be done? Can asbestos be done during summer break? The entire building needs asbestos abatement. It's not a 10-week job, and piecemealing that just pushes down the need to, I can say safely, that we've had to abate a closet that took in the district one summer, and it took the summer to abate that closet adequately, and then rebuild that one classroom, and that was like the project. So thinking about an entire building, that's not likely. And all the health services be maintained, and I already shared the response to that. Could you just go back to our presentation for a second?
Go back to the presentation.
Yeah, the presentation. Thank you. Thanks. So again, there are 5 possible scenarios being considered, and these are in no particular order. We look at any one of these options. The closing of Roosevelt, reducing our footprint from 7 to 6 buildings, the rebuild of Roosevelt with no closures, so maintaining 7 buildings, rebuilding Roosevelt, looking at closing either rebuilding Roosevelt and then either going from 7 to 6 for that rebuild, and that would mean looking to repurpose Woodrow Wilson, or repurpose Thomas Jefferson, or repurpose Horace Mann. And lastly, I just wanted to remind the board, and I'll open for any questions about the community forums, that there were a number of guiding questions, that this came from a lot of time spent by community members, the board, administration, talking about our values and what we need to be thinking at the top of our mind as we look at making a decision. And these are ranked from 1 to 9, and this ranking was based on the average among those 3 groups. And so, are we providing more instructional learning opportunities by the decision we're going to make? Are we having space to continue to engage in community-based services? And I think that's echoed by our community forums with our members of our community. Are we going to be able to mitigate mobility? I think that's a driving factor in terms of saying we're not going to add more transitions. Negative perceptions of the school district, how might the decision impact that? Adequate corrector space for extracurriculars, so, the music, the phys ed, equitable interventions, and that could happen with this change. Allow for current future programming, so it's not just about continuing to do what we're doing now, but what's our vision for additional programming? Just for example, MacArthur, they designed this great third space, that's what was referenced, that main hallway with the performance area in the middle, the ability for the community to use that, open the doors. So how can we be thinking about that? Does the configuration increase opportunities for student transportation? Now, this came out of the community group and from administration and the board, and it's down low, but we heard from some community members that that's not deemed as advantageous, so I'm going to juxtapose those two things. 8, is there space available to support flexible, nimble space for non-traditional students? So you heard tonight about the PATS program. We created space over at 98 Oak Street to make that program happen by moving some services around, having people condense space, shifting floors, so it make that whole top floor available for the PATS program. So this is in reference to that. By changing our footprint in elementary, can we do this in a way that then creates more opportunity for our students? And then 9, does the bones of the building support maintaining the building? So asking ourselves that question, like what's the long-term investment in our building and keeping that building online for us and continuing to invest it? Does that make sense? So does anybody have any questions about the forums themselves before I turn over to Mr.
Yes, I do. One of the comments, and I know that these are just comments from the folks that sit in on the forums, but there was a comment made about redistricting and how would that impact class sizes. I'm trying to find the rationale to redistricting and how that solves your underutilization of space.
So I think the comment was coming, if we look at buildings, I'll name 2 buildings that are coming to mind, Roosevelt and MacArthur. Those 2 buildings have fairly high numbers, higher numbers of average class sizes in the class size and numbers of sections. Okay? So if redistricting, is there a way for us to look at redistributing some students, not all, but some students to Woodrow Wilson or Span for their class sizes, and numbers of available space, actual additional classrooms could be utilized, thereby making it more equitable in terms of numbers of sections, numbers of total students in the building. That was
Doesn't change the number of kids you're educating.
It doesn't change the number of kids we're educating.
Or it doesn't change necessarily the number of teachers you require, or does it?
I haven't studied it to that extent, to be honest. It might result in some level of reduction in costs associated with that, but not to the extent of a full building, for sure. But those are
probably do is reduce the class size numbers and so that they're more level across the buildings. However, they would all be much significantly below those benchmarks that we indicated. That would be 80%.
It would not go to 18 and 20 across the district, no. No, but we would not have some buildings with, 10 or 11 students on average, or,
Which might have buildings with 15 in it across the district.
well, it could for those buildings. It could for those buildings, and so, what came to mind when I saw that comment was I was thinking at one time this area here was served by Columbus, right? And then now they're absorbed at MacArthur Elementary School. And so they're all transported, so transporting to MacArthur, they'd be transported to Horace Mann, which is, didn't measure the distance, but not too terribly, further as opposed to those kinds of redistricting. Or looking at the distribution between Thomas Jefferson and Horace Mann, for example, and that comment, why Jefferson kids, go to a certain school, they're physically closer to, or they go to Jefferson, would be physically closer to Horace Mann. So that distribution.
Remember at one time Hamilton was sitting over there also, off of St. John.
That's right.
And so, and there used to be 14 elementary schools in the district, so there has been a significant amount of redistricting.
Yeah.
We took 2 schools off the south side, I think at the same time. Not the same, Longfellow and Lincoln, so, to go from 14 to 7, obviously, there was a significant amount of redistricting over time.
I know that in my tenure in central office, we have had years where Thomas Jefferson classrooms have had to be capped, and so if anybody lived in some of the areas that they would typically go to Thomas Jefferson, we would place them in Horace Mann for the remainder of the year, and then look to see what the Thomas Jefferson numbers were, to see when they could re-enter. That was just because of enrollment and trying to adjust that. We've had to do that in a number of our buildings over the years, mid-year, not hundreds of students, but, which then, I guess, reiterates or begs the question, should the district be also looking at the redistricting first to see what that reveals, and probably in combination with some of the other strategies around.
The only thing it doesn't do, it doesn't add students to the district.
No. The redistricting doesn't add students to the district, correct? It's just looking at, I think the individuals in the community were being responsive to the call for equity across the district.
Tanya, this body of information that you presented tonight certainly evidences to the school board and to our community that we've been listening to the public. And there's a lot of emerging themes here. We're certainly not surprised. I've been a longtime resident of the city. I went to all the schools, all my family, but the bedrock of the Binghamton City schools for over 100 years has been neighborhood schools. So we're certainly not surprised to hear and see the number of issues that have come up. And secondly, I think it's certainly because of the declining enrollment situation, which has predicated the study. We're declining in enrollment. We certainly, whatever the decision that comes out of this, we certainly don't want it to exacerbate migration or exiting from the city. We certainly don't want to do that. People leaving our city or transferring students. So that's a concern that I personally have as we listen to our community. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, the way we're gonna proceed, if people feel free to speak up. One of the things, we're gonna let the public speak next. However, what I did want to say is kind of chart to suggest, we're not gonna make a decision tonight, okay? The one thing that I really need to know, and we need to provide that information to the administration, is there any data that the board needs additionally to make a decision?
Something that I think should concern, I think it was a number one issue there, not only obviously decision impact programs, but also the academic performance of the students, particularly at the K through 5 level. What is the level of proficiency and competency currently, and how will this decision impact future academic results? I think that's absolutely critical. We're talking about, again, smaller class sizes as it relates to academic achievement.
I don't know if there's whether you need a crystal ball to determine how it's gonna affect
Well,
future performance.
I think that's certainly something that should be on the table.
Something you want to monitor, yes.
Yeah, we have our New York State test results, don't we, for
Yes.
for elementary?
So Dr. Penner, we have that, we have other internal assessments, and so it's fun to say this back to you. You're looking for differences in class sizes and how they're performing with a larger class size versus smaller. And I only ask the question because there are other factors in terms of
That's correct.
density of poverty, attendance rates in those classrooms, and a number of factors. So I can sort of blend together and see if it reveals anything for our community.
Thank you.
I did have a question, just for some more clarity about the closing, or the rebuilding of Roosevelt. That time span was pretty, the range was pretty wide for 4 to 15 years to complete due to the amount of building aid. So I just, that's just a huge gap.
Yes, the 15 years kind of considers a scenario where we are only able to access 5 years of the money at a time. Okay, which is how
So
we're
does that mean,
funded.
would it be completed, like, so?
Well, I would think that doing a project over 15 years is a no-go. So the intent there is to get the money up front through legislation. So in other words, instead of going in 3 5-year increments, is to work with our legislators to establish legislation that would give us that 15-year increment up front.
Okay.
So, and your other question had to deal with, did you have another part to that? You started out. Okay, just want to make sure.
I just wanted to understand the wide range there.
And the other one, 4 years, would assume that you're gonna move the folks from Roosevelt into the other buildings. Now, if by chance they do come back and you do decide to rebuild Roosevelt, you're able to maintain them at the same site, which I'm hesitant to say that you could because of all the construction and things that would go on, would be going on at the same time you're trying to run school. Then that may only be a 2-year scenario, 2 to 3 years time. If I didn't have to move the students out of Roosevelt and demolish and just replace Roosevelt, right? So the 4-year piece is because we would be moving those kids to another building and then move them back. So you had to get them out of there to be able to,
Right.
and that front 2 years is to do that planning and actually make the move of the students to the building. Or as Dr. Thompson said, there may be some other scenarios where you age out in terms of don't move the kids, let them continue on, and you just don't start anybody doing that.
And is this, like, the request for this type of aid, is this on, like, their radar? That, okay,
It's been mentioned to them, but it's basically come back with a plan, so. That's where we're at. So what I'd like to be able to do is obviously we wanna get input from the public on this, since they haven't had the opportunity since we closed the community forums. Or they may not have attended them, so this would be an opportunity for them to address that, but also relative, what's critical is the board is the body that's authorized to make this decision. And that's our responsibility, and I just want to make sure that everybody has enough information, or if you have questions, ask them, so that we're in a position to be able to make those decisions.
Mr. Leno, one other point I want to make, I didn't mention, I meant to mention, you saw the enrollment trend. This year's beds data, we're down an additional 85 students, so it did trend down again. Across the district, not just elementary, but across the district.
You didn't have to say that. Did you?
Well, somebody might ask the question, so.
I just kidding. Okay. So moving on to the next portion of our meeting, and that would be the public comment. This time period is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, 30 minutes total. Is there anybody that'd like to speak? Okay. Come on down to the microphone, and I'm going to read public comment guidelines so that we're all on the same page. Board of Education welcomes members of the public to address them at school board meetings. However, school personnel should be given the opportunity to hear the concerns and work to resolve them at the appropriate level first. As questions or concerns are handled best when addressed as close to your origins as possible. To preserve decorum and conduct school business in a professional manner, the board requests that all persons attending a meeting maintain order and follow the rules. Anyone wishing to address the Board of Education at a regularly scheduled business meeting will have an opportunity to do so. The board will use this time to listen. Speakers will have 3 minutes to address the board. By law, the board is not permitted to address personnel or individual student matters in open session. When acknowledged, speakers will be asked to state their name, relationship to the district, i.e. a parent, teacher, resident, student, and their topic. If your comments require follow-up, we will ask that you contact the board clerk after the meeting. Her phone number is 762-8100, extension 319. Email is browns@binghamtonschools.org. That information is our contact information for our board clerk, Sonia Brown. Take the first speaker, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Julie Drozdowski. I am a graduate. I am a parent, West Side parent, DJ, and a faculty member in the Binghamton District. I work at Roosevelt, and as much as I love the West Side, grew up on the South Side, I'm speaking on behalf of Roosevelt tonight. Just a couple things. I served on the Feasibility Communities Forum, and looking at the Schoolzilla data as of today, Schoolzilla's website that we use within the district to track enrollment, it appears that elementary enrollment is up across the district in all but one building. As of today, compared to the data from our study last October, we're up nearly 200 kids at the elementary level. So that's, and I spoke out at the community forums very, very much against using the COVID years in the enrollment data. I do think we need to exclude those and we need to consider those additional birth rates. I think that while we have a decline showing, it's misrepresented in the data. We have a new housing development on the north side that's increasing our enrollment there and keeping it steady. I think that needs to be considered. And while ideally we'd like to keep all 7 elementary schools open and redistrict to maintain or increase equity within the buildings, I don't think it makes any sense to close Roosevelt. When looking at the available options, of the 4 schools that we're looking at closing, 2 of them would affect the 2 smallest buildings in the district and therefore the smallest number of students. Shifting a small number of students to a building that's still on the same side of town would have a minimal impact to their education. Closing Roosevelt would affect 15% of our district elementary population at a minimum. That's just our students, not the buildings they're moving into, many of which are already at a significant disadvantage in their current circumstances. How can we as a district say that we are for all of our students when we're even considering asking our most disadvantaged students to accept another blow to their lives by separating from their peers and neighbors and shipping them to 3 other buildings? It's very concerning to me as a West Side parent that a very vocal minority is influencing the decisions of the board, apparently, so heavily. It seems that it doesn't seem to matter that the small class sizes in one of the 3, there are 3 West Side schools, is an anomaly. Those small class sizes are not the norm across the district. And this has been an inequity problem for years. When my daughter was at TJ, her 5th grade classroom was filled beyond capacity. And as a side note, I live closer to Mann than TJ. She should have been going to Mann, and she would have had a smaller class size. I love TJ. I love Roosevelt. Having worked in multiple districts over the years, our neighborhood schools are a huge benefit to our larger community. It would be a total detriment to close one of them on the north side when it's the only one. I have more thoughts from the rest of my building. I'd love to share them if I would be allowed an additional 3 minutes to speak on behalf of my building and not just myself.
Good can have another member.
Yeah, can somebody just come stand with you as you speak?
Can't,
on your behalf?
defer.
Thank you. Some of the advantages of Roosevelt that I'd like to speak to are that many of our families rely on supports from our various programs, like the backpack program, as we mentioned, our Teddy Bear Health Clinic, our Rooted program, our Partners program. We're teaching our families how to live in our building, in our neighborhood. Roosevelt consistently ranks in the top 5 buildings for attendance within the district. It currently has a higher percentage of attendance than the district average. This speaks to our strength as a building and as a family. Closing West Side would be, as I said before, a total detriment to the children of the North Side. Roosevelt is also the only school of the 4 in the study that has its own dedicated green space. And living within the city limits, it is incredibly important that our students get safe outdoor play space. If Roosevelt were to close, it would present significant hardships, including concerns that students won't be able to participate in after-school activities due to lack of parent transportation, concerns about students not being able to pick up students who are sick because they don't have transportation. We already have parents that struggle to attend conferences, CSE meetings, and participate in activities. Farther to travel would increase that lack of participation. Students who miss a bus won't come to school. If we're concerned about attendance, we have to consider that. Our busing situation is already a mess. We have students on the bus for sometimes as much as 45 minutes. We really can't afford to ask our students to be on the bus longer than that and to stand out and wait for their rides when we have these beautiful neighborhood schools. If you take Roosevelt from our students, you're also taking their clinic, and so many of our families depend on that. And finally, a concern about employment. Are the teachers and the staff that, are people going to leave the district if they're rezoned to other schools? There's already a teacher shortage. Who's going to teach our students when we lose these teachers? And what about the teachers that may not get the grade or the specialty that they are comfortable in and that they already excel at if we're all shifted to other buildings? Thank you.
I do want to explain that I did err. I should not have allowed her to speak because what she basically did is the person that came after her to stand next to her actually deferred her minutes to her, and that you can't do that. So I won't allow that any further, but just as a point of order, go ahead, sir.
Good evening, my name is Bob Crispin. I've been teaching at Binghamton City School District for 20 years in the music department. I've literally taught every level. Many of you know that, you've seen me around. I'm currently in band and TJ as the band director at both schools. I can't emphasize enough how this would affect my programs. I do want to start off by saying the facilities, I just want to emphasize that they do matter. And we have an issue with equity in facilities in our buildings. We know that. We're well aware of it. Performance spaces are a big one. And I know that some of the parents don't realize that, there's a big difference in a performing facility at Ben Franklin versus Horace Mann. We all know that. We see it. It's there. It's kind of hard. I just want to address that real quick. Putting that aside, numbers. Let's talk numbers for a minute. The COVID Relief Act gave $190 billion to the U.S. Department of Ed. Of that, $14 billion awarded to New York State, with $7 billion going to New York City and $7 billion being split with the upstate New York school districts. The Inflation Reduction Act just added $7.2 billion to the U.S. Department of Ed. Breakdown to that money is not available as of this time. How, with all of that money being distributed to that many people, are we in a crisis situation at this moment? I'm very perplexed how that money can be held to use to help us in this situation. Is that not what this money is for? And if it's not, then we need to be finding some people around us to find out why we can't use that money for this situation. Have we talked to everybody? Have we gone to every available resource? People like Don Lupardo, have we talked to everyone and seen, is there a way to reallocate some of this money to help our school district? Because to me, I cannot believe with all that money trickling down from the top that we are suddenly in a shortage and that we're in a situation and that it's a surprise to anybody. With that in mind, I did do some crunching numbers today. If we executed any of these plans, if I'm reading my numbers correctly, we're only saving 1% of our operational costs from year to year. My question to you is, how much is 1% of our operational costs worth? And that is something you need to consider as a board. We've been told to make connections with kids and not to look at them as numbers, but we're now whittling down our school buildings to numbers and not people, students, and staff members. You claim to include all stakeholders, but how did you include our staff? Did you call staff meetings? Did you talk to the staff specifically? Did you ask us our thoughts, our ideas, our comments, our side of the story? I really hadn't had that opportunity. Did you ask them for their input and their help? Just something to consider in the future. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane Andrew, and I have taught in the district for 30 years. I plan to actually retire from the district in 10 more years and actually teach for 40 years. This huge decision is going to be impactful on what I do and choose to do for the next 10 years. And it kind of saddens me that all of us are in this situation. But I wanted just to bring a couple of things to note tonight. I love my job. I wouldn't be here for 30 years if I didn't. But I have given a lot of thought to why not leave the district and go be vested in another district for the 10 years, because it seems like maybe that's going to be a better decision for me. Not that I planned on being at Horace Mann for 40 years, but that's probably what I would have chose to do. I hope that you see that the decisions that you're going to make are not only pitting the sides of towns on each other, but you're also now going to be pitting staff against staff and families against families, and it's very disheartening to me. Couple of things to note. Busing is already horrendous. I waited for 3 kids to be picked up today for 27 minutes because there was a bus accident. Our middle school principals are staying after school up to an hour every day, just waiting for the elementary buses to be finished to bring their kids home. Already, just now. And when you decide to redistrict or reassign buildings, the busing's not going to be there for it. If you're redistributing, you also need to look at the economic status of it. For example, if you close Thomas Jefferson or Horace Mann and you realign those kids that are on Riverside Drive and say, oh, we're going to put them all over at Thomas Jefferson, or we're going to put all these kids from here over to MacArthur, you just made the economic status of another school very detrimental. Every year I go to my kids' houses and I visit them. I see where they live and I'm aware of exactly what conditions they live in, and I've done that for probably 30 years. Our kids at Horace Mann and our families are choosing to stay at Horace Mann and live in poverty every day. We had a visit just 2 weeks ago, and we actually stopped the car to get out for a family that is walking the streets of Main Street near Horace Mann, looking for a house to rent so that they could come and stay at Horace Mann. They currently are homeless and they walk 2 miles to school to Horace Mann every day just to stay in our buildings. And I know that just shows you the resilience and the love that our families have for our buildings. And I know that this is definitely a hard decision for you to make, but I want you to realize that you need to be swift on your decisions. You need to be honest on your decisions, and you need to be transparent to everyone, because that's going to be crucial to us. It's dragged on a long time already, and so I hope that you can come to a decision and let us know by next month.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers tonight? Seeing none, we'll close.
Oh, I'll be right.
Hello. My son actually came tonight. He's in 4th grade at Horace Mann. He actually
Could you identify?
Oh, yes, I'm
Sorry.
Anna Brahim. I'm a parent at Horace Mann. I have 1 child at Horace Mann and 1 child at West Middle. Of course, my West Middle went through Horace Mann, so, and I went through Horace Mann too.
My son came tonight, he actually did want to say a few things, but it's his bedtime, so I'm gonna try to relay a little bit of what he wanted to say. And then I'll get into a little bit of what I wanted to say. I have gotten up here and I've already spoken, before, at previous meetings, and it's the same. These are real concerns of us. We really do have huge concerns about this. These neighborhood schools are very important to us. It's our children, it's our communities, we're the taxpayers here. This is something that we're going to continue to fight for, because this is very important to us. What is more important than our children? That's number one. Number two, my son wanted to come up here and tell everybody that how amazing Horseman is, and how amazing his friends are, and how amazing his teachers are. He plays sports through the city, and his teachers are coming to his sports games on a Sunday to come support him. That's something that's so important. When you see your teacher in the stands, I'm just gonna say the only game that he won, or his team won, was the one his teacher came to, okay? So that's very important. Also, if we can give consistency to our children, that right there is so important. Some things in our children's lives and our students' lives, the only consistency that they have is the school that they come to and the teachers that they see every day and the love that they're receiving from the staff and the other children there. If that's something that we can continue, that we don't have to change up in their lives and there's so much already changing, and that's just normal. Think about all the other changes that are coming from COVID and all that other thing, and all the other stuff that's affecting their lives. If this is if we can give them some sort of stability, we need to do that. If we can not look at them as numbers and money, and we can look at them as who they are as people, if it's not broke, don't fix it. My children, and I know a lot of the other children in the district, or in Horseman, they're performing well. The school is one of the only, good standing, thank you. Thank you. Is one of the only schools in good standing in the district. That's important to us as parents. Like I said, these are our kids. This is our communities, and this is our neighborhood. So this is incredibly important to us. So just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to say my son came to speak, but he had to go to bed, and I wanted to relay that information to you guys. Thank you.
I'll be really brief. I'm Laura Cook, kindergarten mom from Horseman. And I just wanted to say I've been to a lot of these community forums so far, and I haven't heard much in the way of support for closing a school. I've heard a lot of concerns, and it seems like the community doesn't have a lot of support for this plan. And I know you said, Mr. Whalen, that you guys have the power. You guys are in control of making this budget decision. I understand that. But you only have that power because we voted for you to have that power. So I think you need to be listening to us and hopefully doing what we ask of you. That's all.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next order of business.
Just ask for clarity about something.
If there's something that they may have said that needs to be corrected.
No, I'm just from the theme of things, I'm wondering if it's understood that regardless of what decision is made, that displacement at Roosevelt is going to be inevitable because of the condition of the building. I want to make sure that people understand that for at least some period of time. Any decision that we make, that has to happen because of the condition of the building.
Let me see if I can correct what you said or rephrase.
I'm asking.
Rephrase. There is potential, I believe, based on my conversations with the architect and engineers. Initially, they indicated that if we were to rebuild on the Roosevelt site, that they'd be able to do at least the classroom addition without moving people out. However, since then, I asked them again because that's a lot of construction, a lot of demolition, a lot of noise going on, trying to put a building up and educate kids in the same space almost. And he came back and said he didn't think it would be possible. So There's a possibility that they might not have to get relocated, but I think it's a stronger possibility that they would, while the demolition and construction would go on, should Roosevelt be the candidate for that.
I gotta say something.
I'm sorry,
I'm just gonna say something.
this,
Over the noise and all that, that's really bugging me right now.
this is, the period to speak is closed, you can come up, there's another opportunity that you'll be
Okay, I
able
just
to
wanna
speak.
say the noise, you keep mentioning noise, that's gonna disrupt the kids. We live by a highway. We have seen SWAT teams running down the street with guns, and you guys are worrying about noise?
Construction noise, it'll be a daily.
I don't think the kids will be happy. And
Health-
that's, I
health
don't
and
think you guys
safety might-
understand it.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank
I'm
you.
good way.
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I have another, not a question, but because of what you just said, I wondered if that was something that Tanya could also provide so that we can make a decision. So Brian said that there were two options. I was under the impression that there would be displacement regardless. Is that some information that you can provide for us?
Yeah, I think, what I would recommend that we bring back those options that the architect shared, my goodness, months ago, in terms of the 5 options for Roosevelt, and have them come and speak to that.
Yeah, specifically, her question is whether or not we would have to vacate the buildings.
So I just, not for you to answer right at this moment, when Brian earlier asked, what other questions did we have so we can make a decision? Hearing that made me now have a question, so we're saying that.
Yep, I think we can put that in place, and again, there are lots of factors that can impact those things, but knowing what we know today and just general construction, yeah, and then it's going to vary based on the option selected, and I think would be helpful, as that's what you're saying in terms of the impact of the space.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the work session and regular meeting of September 20th, 2022. Can I get a motion on those minutes? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Financial report for the month of September 2022, that's in your supplemental information 1021. Kathy Blackman has joined us this evening. Does anybody have any questions on the financial report? No? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Kathy. Next on the agenda is special reports, since I left all my notes home. Audit committee, I gotta ask you a question. Did we brief the internal audit? We recently had debriefing on 2 audits. One was for our internal audit, which is conducted by our internal auditors, TST BOCES. And it was a pretty clean audit. They looked at our financial statement, specifically the Medicaid reimbursements, and audited our ability to remove employees in a timely manner from our books once they leave the district. That audit, we did take a deficiency in terms of the number of people who remained on our books after they terminated. So that is part of a corrective action plan, which will be implemented through HR. We will, through the exit process, make sure that those people are eliminated from the books on a regular basis when the exit interviews take place, or in absence of an exit interview when they separate from the district. The Medicaid audit uncovered a couple of deficiencies relative to turning in their scripts on time for Medicaid reimbursement, which we now need to go back. There's about $7,000 that needed to be recovered through that process. So we need to make sure that our nurses and our providers are completing their Medicaid reimbursement paperwork and submitting it in a timely manner. There is a corrective action plan as part of, I think it's G2, which calls out that corrective action plan, and also approves the audit report, which we completed with the internal auditors. We also went through an external audit from EFPR, I get that right? Auditors out of Buffalo who are external auditors, and they focused on our financial statement, all the schedules that are attached to that, and also, I think what else? Of course, the extra classroom funds, which we always have fun with. And I think this is the second year in a row that our external auditors did not have a finding with our records. So certainly my thanks to all our thanks to the BOCES, under Kathy, for the work that you're doing, and our staff here on the cabinet for those good audit results. So it's these last 2 years we've had fairly good success. There are some things we need to pay attention to a little bit closer, but the results of these audits have well surpassed my expectations, and certainly the performance of years past. So thank you. That's the audit committee. Next on the agenda is the communications audit. How about a communication evaluation? Request for proposal on tax taxes.
I have a copy. I have a copy of what I had previously shared with the board. I'd like to have a hard copy in front of you. So I'll pass these around. Thank you. So we as a board have had conversations over the past few years about image of the district, perceptions, looking to see, are we reaching, when we send out messages, our families, our students, our community. And so I spent some time, and I also want to thank Mr. Steve Prasad for his encouragement to take this under advisement. This is part of his profession. And so being able to talk to a board member to say, hey, what did you experience? What are your thoughts on this? Has been much appreciated. And of course, I do also turn to our public relations officers that are in the district. And so, well, last year I collected some data on the effectiveness of tweeting and Facebook posts and use of social media and emails and so on. I'm really looking to gain more insight into not only how we're doing, but some suggestions from somebody outside the district on how we can be doing better. And there was an audit like this done back in, I think it was 2013, and which resulted in a communications plan that was pretty much implemented. And I sat down with Christine and Carrie and looked it over, and everything on there we've done and then some. So I think the timing of this is good, particularly coming out of COVID and not thinking about some of the restrictions. And I think we've also increased our family access to technology just through the use of our Remind app as one example. We were looking in cabinet today at the utilization across the district, and it's incredible to see how many messages, teacher to student, student, parent to teacher. So in the RFP, what I'm proposing is that we release the communication audit on October 31st. I don't think it's significant that it's Halloween, other than it's a Monday, and have then paced the audit so that we would be positioned by the December board meeting to appoint a firm to do the audit, and then starting off with the new year with implementing that. As with every RFP, we've tried to be consistent, and Mr. Rowan has been instrumental in supporting RFPs for capital work and
other related work, legal. And so keeping alignment with that. I also reached out to our CBO, our BOCES, and asked them for other, because part of their work with us as a purchasing agent is that resource to say what audits are out there that you've supported or aware of, and they can reach out to the resources. And so the way the audit is ultimately framed is, clear submission guidelines, selection criteria and process, the scope of the services that we're looking for, a firm selected to partner with our district's communications department. So this is not in isolation, that I want them to get some insight. Really looking for expert analysis of current communications tactics. So somebody has that experience. I'm on the top of page 4 right now. A statistically sound formal survey. So anything that they're using isn't, just, hey, this is what we think you should ask, but what's the evidence behind its effectiveness? And then when you utilize that, show us some results that were also impactful that showed improvement. Informal stakeholder focus group or interviews, so it's not just one form of means of gathering information and guidance and recommendations moving forward. So we're not just looking for data analysis, we're really looking for strategic insight and action that we can take as a district. Furthermore, what we're looking for the firm to reveal are current perceptions, expectations, needs, and communication patterns from our district stakeholders. Back when we did it in 2013, Doug Titus was with BOCES Communication, and he was instrumental in doing that. And at the time, what the district did was they did a county survey. Wanted to know what the perceptions of Binghamton was in not only in Binghamton, but of Vestal residents and of JC residents. We try to gather, a lot of information, because part of being a small city in a kind of landlocked county, right, is that we're finding our own perceptions, or we find the perceptions of the larger community. So that's what this is kind of getting out. I'll be thinking about that when we do the interviews. Measuring community and parent perceptions of our district, as I mentioned that, measure effectiveness of district branding and marketing initiatives. By January, we should have substantively, these are the mission, vision, values, and commitments of how are we doing with that. So again, the timing I think is helpful. Provide guidance in crafting the strategic communications plan. Benchmarks, what are the benchmarks that we will be putting in? We're asking the firm to make those recommendations. And any recommendations for improving targeted communications and outreach within the district community. We've included the proposal requirements, general information we would want to be looking at. And then as you go down to, of course, we want the project staffing and their experience, their expertise, experience and references, maybe an example of an audit that they've done and the outcome of the plan. And then finally, a rubric used to evaluate the process. And so we establish the criteria that we're looking for, so that anybody coming in would know ahead of time, how we're judging their proposals. And then of course a timeline for making any determination. And then I would look at that, I would move forward to the board, recommendation, but we'd look at them, narrow it down to 3 proposals, and then likely, just close time, maybe 4, I would then be looking at, and my recommendation would be Mr. Seepersson would give in his expertise, bring a board member on board, myself, PR communications individuals, either myself and or Eric, because he works with most of our RFPs process, and then narrow it down to 3, interview them, and then select a firm and bring that forward through a presentation to the board on what they'd be doing, and of course bring back the results to the board. I've asked questions around costs associated with, for larger organizations, and it's been around the 50,000-ish at the top end. So I have no idea. When we did the feasibility study, we thought it was a bucket of information. It depends on the amount of time that they're going to be spending. We want them to spend really with analysis as well as interface with our community. That's a ballpark. I don't think so. It's not like a 300, large sum. When we looked at our, I can't want to call it feasibility. When we looked at our stimulus money and that utilization, I'm confident that underneath contract services, based on the current running of that there would be financial means to support that within that kind of $50,000 range. Again, it could come in at 30 or 20, I don't know. But I think I would advise the district really pause and do this in a significant way, in an efficient way, so that we can have these answers and moving
moving forward. We are also launching a new website. I want to mention it's going to be launched by the end of the month. It's through a product called Aptigee, and it looks wonderful so far. Its intention is to be crisp in the sense that here's the information you need and who do you contact, and not be kind of overloaded with information, but yet push out effectively the news. It's also tied to our social media, so we can push that very easily to our website. And so administrators were actually trained today on how to access that. So I'll stop there and open it up for questions. Yes.
I see this, I think most of us would agree, this is a very worthwhile project. Time and time again, this word perception comes up in our district, as we know. And once people understand what really is happening inside these wonderful buildings, the word gets out. So we are judged, as we know, from outside in, not from inside out. So this project, I think, will, with Steve's expertise in helping in marketing, will improve our brand. We are a district of choice. We want to always be a district of choice. And over the years, we've been the gold standard for many of these districts. The issue is, as you said, communication, and communicating that and getting that good word out, which it's very real. And again, over and over, when people come and visit our buildings, they really see what's going on inside. That just needs to be communicated. And this project will help do that in a different way. So it's highly commendable.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know, I know in the past there had been like a PR committee. Is that still?
We dissolved the PR committee when we had brought on PR officials. So before they were here, we didn't have PR associates who were actually controlling. And I meant to, he's since left, but Christina Kunzman, who was on our team, was just promoted to Riti Bosis as the manager of all PR services for the region. So kudos to her, and I think it's also a testament to our school district in the sense that she gained the skill coming in brand new and then escalated to a position where now her peers have elected her, want her to lead the region PR. Having said that, we did replace her with David Romanovich, who was overseeing all the PR efforts for iHeartRadio locally. And so it's, again, coming with great experience and wanting to work with the school district. And so Christina continues to support him in transitioning. But yeah, that was before we had those resources. We also have Patriot ambassadors that give us some insight on a bi-monthly basis on how we're communicating and gives us some ideas and strategies. Yeah.
Just a couple of comments. Feels too loud, but I think the people watching at home benefit more if I use it. I really appreciate that there's the receptivity to this idea, and not because it was something I pitched, but I really feel like we need this, and I feel like it has very strong potential to really help us, and image and perception are very, very important. They say perception is reality, and good, bad, or indifferent, whatever people perceive of us has a way of being the reality. And I think, just to put it out there and make sure my feelings on it are made known, I think the BOCES staff is doing a great job. So this is not meant to say that we're deficient in any way. And although this was inspired by the feasibility study in part, it's not to say that I want an armchair quarterback, like let's rewind and do this differently necessarily, although maybe the consultant would have advised us differently. But there's a difference between what we get on a daily basis in terms of media relations and all the activities around that, and strategic communications. And so I really think that this would energize and leverage the staff in a different way than what we currently have. And what you get when you get these consultant reviews is a reinforcement for the things you're doing well, and you get best practices, but then you also get the things that are out there that are pain points, some of which you know and some of which are not known. And I think the community surveys will get some of the feedback, but sometimes there's almost like these internal feedback loops that just keep going on, like we just do the same things because what we know is what we know. What we know is what we know, the things we're good at, and sometimes we just have that sort of glass ceiling when we're able to do it. I think this will help us to punch through that. And to the comment, it's too bad that we don't have more of an audience for this than we did for the earlier items, because I think this is very important, because communication, whether it's done well or done poorly, is going to make or break many things that you do. And to the comment that we had from one of the last speakers about, we got voted in to be responsive. And I think this is a way we are doing that. I hope that that effort's made known and the value of this gets seen by the larger community. So thank you to those around the table that do see the value in this, and I think it really does have a lot of potential to help us.
Somebody else?
I was waiting until you were done. I'm gonna speak up more. So I just also wanna make sure that one of the components of this is to better reach our families, right? So yes, the perception is a thing that's out there, but more so to get the information to our families and see how they best want to be communicated with.
Yes, I envision things like, again, we were just looking at the Remind app, which is something released to support COVID, and communications allows you to utilize your cell phone or your computer and reach out to another person's cell phone or computer in a way to message without revealing telephone numbers and those kinds of things. So it's anonymous, and yet you know who you're talking to because the way you set the system up is like code based. And I was just blown away by the data in terms of the numbers of messages sent. So we can figure out in that system who we're reaching, because we can cross-check that against our school tool in terms of what we have and who aren't we, right? And so the potential outcome could be, put some efforts towards identifying that whatever percentage who's never responding to that. Is it because they didn't know about it? Is it because they don't have access? And so for those, maybe it's a focus group with that group, so that's what my vision is. But again, I'm optimistic that we'll find a firm that has some familiarity with the district our size, some familiarity with changing perceptions, but also some familiarity with working with the demographics of our district, and that's important. That'll be really important for us as well.
Okay, so last thing I'll say, I'm also hoping that out of this comes a way to better communicate with folks about the budget and the budgeting process, and maybe engage them more. That would be nice.
I think that kind of matches the vision I have, and so one of the things that's in the process is a communications audit. And they look at everything that you're putting out to see what's working well, what's not working well, what are the holes to be filled in. So if there are gaps between what we're putting out and what the parents are getting or not getting, if the consultant's doing it well, they're able to identify those so that we can improve. And so I think when I reflect on previous communications audits or communications plans that I was a part of or that I've seen, they identify a bunch of audiences. Some are internal, some are external, because there's that external audience, somebody living outside the district, but they have a friend that's going to move to Binghamton, and hopefully they're talking this up well and not saying, oh, stay away from that district, you don't want to go to Binghamton. There's a lot of that going on now. And so we want to get out in front of that, or I guess we're sort of behind it, but to try to turn that around, but then also do slicker ways of reaching the people that are the stakeholders, clients, families, whatever you want to call them, but the core audience that, if we're not meeting their needs, then a lot of the communication efforts are wasted.
Do we have, or have we looked into who we plan on sending this RFP to?
So I asked that of CBO, they're gathering that information. I know I talked to our PR associates because they go to national and state level conferences and see groups. I do not have a list for you right now, but they'll.
No, I just want to make sure it's spread our wings a little bit, not, go to two people all over.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Recommendations?
I think that's correct.
Doesn't hurt. You send them an RFP, that's all. I left you my comments.
Yeah, I see, insurance.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we have, what our asking our, whoever's proposing, what their insurance coverages are. Normal. You think you wouldn't need it for this, but I think, you do. Validity date on the proposal that they're gonna submit in terms of price. How long is it valid for? I wanna make sure it's valid long enough to be able to award it, so it doesn't expire on you. And I would ask for a schedule of their proposed execution of the work. So you can see on the schedule how long, what the tasks are and how long they plan to to be executing the work. That's good, 10 seconds.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Anybody have anything else? Okay, moving on to the next item of business is the discussion of board member attendance at conferences. We did look through the policy. We think we need to put some things in there to make sure it's clear, and also to process improvement, to talk about how we budget stuff in the future. So that if folks want to go and the board approves it, that it's budgeted there. So I've asked Steve to look at that, and he took it on his own to address the policy. The chairman of the policy, this would have, I want to get board input because this really affects board members. And at that point, once we do that, we'll turn it over to the policy committee to do the rest of the work. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve and ask him to take us through a discussion on that.
Sure, although I think you probably gave about 50% of the updates, so thanks, it saved me a little bit of work as far as, no, it's fine, I mean, the rationale behind the meeting, I guess I've got the meat of it here, but the run-up of why we need this, I think Brian had said pretty well, is that, something that we've looked at, even about a year ago, I started to think more after becoming vice president about board development activities and how we attend workshops during the year, what sorts of information we need and we get exposed to, and make sure that everybody was getting things that they matched up to in terms of, like, if you're interested in X committee because you have expertise or experience in it, you get put on that committee, so on and so forth. And the same thing with conferences, that people are going to the conferences they find interesting and they get information they feel is of value and they bring it back to the district, and it's for the benefit of everyone. So I felt the policy would benefit from some red lines to add some specificity to the process. We've had some questions recently about trying to get permission and funds to attend conferences. And so not only give it specifics, but a sense of objectivity. So it shouldn't be one person deciding. So if I was the president and Albert wanted to go to a conference, it should not be my decision unless you need the money like right now and we didn't have a board meeting coming up fast enough to make that request fulfilled. So that should be a board decision, but also there should be a standardized process. And so one of the things that I call for in here is would lead to creating a form that people would fill out. So you specify in writing, this is the conference I want to go to, this is where and when it is, these are the objectives, goals, what I bring back, and this is how it would help us. And then we have that on the basis of just the objective information to make a decision if we feel that would be beneficial to us or not. And also to plan ahead, because some of these can get pretty expensive with travel. It's like even the new board member training. I went to a Long Island, drove in my own car, got reimbursed for mileage, 2 nights in a hotel plus conference registration. That was like about $1,000 right there, and some of these are much more. So we wanted the ability to try to plan ahead as much as possible because it can be easy for these funds that are allocated to the board on a yearly basis to disappear between NISBA dues and workshops and the new member trainings that are required, and it doesn't leave a lot left over. So this is for conferences people decide that they would like to attend on their own hook to get the permission, the funding for it. It does not apply to the NISBA training that the new members have to complete within their first year because you have to. That's not a decision for any of us to make, so that's to comply with the law. So that's exempted from this. This would be for the everything else. So I'll stop there. Certainly welcome any comments or questions.
I just have one clarification. The policy doesn't change that much other than it puts some words in here. The current policy does require the board to approve for board member conferences. The only thing that we did do last year and this year in our reorganizational meeting, and this was more of a timing issue, that if a request came up to attend a conference and there wasn't enough time to run it through the board for approval, then the board president would have the authority to approve it so that the opportunity didn't slip away. That hasn't changed at all in here, so But that's the only, yes, that's the only reason for, the board president to approve it. It's always been a requirement that, given the time allotment, that the board has to approve those by vote.
No, that's a fair point, and I probably addressed that earlier, at least I wanted to, because certain times the ask was made to you, and we had to do it quickly just because we couldn't call a special meeting. But this gives not a lot changes other than like really wanting to make this more of a defined process, so that way you feel like it shouldn't be favoritism. It shouldn't be, I gave the conference permission to this person, and like, I didn't get the permission because they don't like me or something. We don't want anything. You laugh, but you know, it could happen, so we want to have a sense of fairness to it, so everybody gets treated the same.
So, I will say thank you for making the revisions and making it more clear. Because we do know that sometimes there's a policy, but we know the practice doesn't always match with that, so I appreciate this. And then the only one thing that I don't know, have a question about is in the first paragraph, it says, therefore, the board member encourages the participation of all members at appropriate school board conferences. And I feel like appropriate, like as defined by who. But I do feel like we define that later on in terms of, you know, its relevance to the board, and that's when it can be decided. I don't know if I like appropriate up there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can see that being off-putting, because it's like appropriate according to who, you know, and it feels now it's subjective, and I think what I would like to have is, you know, more of that thought process at the beginning of the year as far as what do we feel we need, and we look at a calendar, and so it's appropriate relative to that, or, I don't know, maybe there's a better word, go back and brainstorm something other than appropriate, because, you know, maybe that's just not, it's sort of the intent, but not, you can read it like, well, appropriate, like, who says?
Yeah, and it could be very subjective.
No, that was,
That's
that was there, that's not, yeah, that's the original word.
very subjective, so someone can say something is inappropriate with no real justification, so that's all.
So one suggestion I would have might be as aligned to the mission, vision, values, and commitments of the district. That would give a set of, here they are. It's something that you approve as a full board in the July, the July reorg meeting. It might help, help define it without defining it, if you know what I mean. Yeah. The other piece I just wanted to add, Stephen, you spoke to it, I appreciate it. When we're discussing this in the agenda meeting, just the timing of that in terms of, we mentioned the cost of attending a NISBA conference, but going outside of the state, the cost being up to escalate regardless of the conferences. So knowing, I could see, I would suggest conversations in January and February when we're firming up the budget for the next year, while you may not know the exact content, if you have a desire to go to, looking at NISBA, whether we're going to state level NISBA, national NISBA, typically offers even more insight, wanting to get outside ideas around, work on a particular committee that you're working on, or those kinds of things can be proposed in January and February so that we could budget for it. Then you can move forward with the processes that's articulated. And there would be one suggestion, because typically we don't have all 7 board members attending the state NISBA, but we do try to budget for it. So I would hate to have to jury that, that's all. That was what that addition of that is, but that would be a suggestion, is just mission and vision of the school district.
And so I had a question, so you're saying that the request form is going to be developed?
Yes.
Yes, and so, so I guess my question is, like, when a person wants to fill out this form and they would like to know where we are at with the current budget, like, will that be part of the process? Will that information be shared freely and easily? How can we incorporate that? Or is that like part of the process is you would like to request this, so you're gonna complete this form, but first you're gonna email Dr. Thompson to see where we're at in that budget line currently, and then that's part of the information you're putting on the form.
I mean, you would ideally give us a projected cost. Let's just say it's $2,000, I'll make it. And then we weigh that against not only do we feel, we could say the content's appropriate, Corinne, we would love you to go, but we can't afford it. So we would, look at the budgetary line at that point, because I think that would be sort of a first line of defense and say, like, if we can't afford it, it's sort of like discussion over, we just can't afford it.
Yes, my question is, will that information be shared with what the budget line is? So
I don't see why it wouldn't, so.
Okay.
Access to anybody can call, sign your sheets. I don't have it.
I'm not the source of it, but I think
I
it would
would
be
just
shared.
call her and get it myself.
Okay, I want that to be
I
part of the
think-
process, so that people don't have a whole bunch of hoops to jump through in case they are trying to do this process.
I think if you fill out the request, that comes to the board, you decide at that point whether you're going or not, isn't that?
Yes, I understand that, but what I'm saying is, why would I not have access to the information?
Oh, I'm not questioning that, I'm just saying that instead of trying to find out if the numbers are there or not, generally, if we put in, even if they're placeholders for different conferences and all, then we know they're there, you might not know specifically where they are or whatever.
So-
You would have, when we do the budgeting, that would be the time to try to identify those.
Right.
Sometimes you can't, because you don't know who's, you don't know if they're gonna happen.
And I understand that, so I understand, because it's very clearly here, right, we're gonna try to propose that, in like February, right, that year prior, I understand that, so we're gonna put in a budget line. But what I'm saying is, when it comes time to actually request or fill out this form, not to say that it's gonna be like a 5-page essay, but if I can just ask very simply, how much do we have left in this budget line? And then I'll say, I'm not even gonna ask. How can that be done easily without pulling teeth?
I think just ask, I would appreciate that more, because it would actually save us time.
Yeah.
Yes, it would, okay.
I'll sign it, she has access to that.
And then say, well,
So,
we don't
so
have-
I asked Sonia,
You
Not
prefer
Dr.
that, wouldn't you? I mean, you're just gonna ask her, you're gonna
Just
look up.
email her and CC me so I can support
Okay.
you.
So-
Yeah.
if that
So
could
we
be
have-
included on the form, or, or you could add it to the policy, since the policy hasn't gone to policy committee yet, just like incorporate that piece. Again, it's about transparency and access to that information.
I'm good with that, to ask for the money first, because that could save us time for us all, or if
You
somebody
don't
wants
have
to.
to, you don't have to fill out the application, that's even better.
And we can add that following the section on, if it's a larger amount of money than typical.
I just
Gas
want,
engine.
I just want to point out, we do pay, what is it, sign, is it 20 grand? The list one? 13, and then we pay dues to small cities also, to be able to attend their, instruction, their, and it's specific to New York State School Board members, so. And we get discounts on those seminars, and we've actually had one that was tailored just for superintendent evaluations. They came here and did that, so we do have that ability. I certainly wouldn't want someone, for example, go to Florida to say, I want to learn about New York State school financing. But you won't, they're just not compatible, but that may be part of what they teach in some of these, so you might get a little bit of both. But we can move on from here. Thank you.
So kind of on that same note, so it's not here in the policy, but again, leaning to anything that is vague, it can possibly be dismissed without any justification, really. I want us to also consider, like, that doesn't only mean NISBA workshops and trainings, right? I think if we're clear that that's not the only thing we're allowed or sanctioned to do. Of course not.
I think that should be our
Dr. Fenner.
first, where we go first to the organizations we pay dues to, because you want to get the value of the membership, but
It's not limited to
they're not
that.
the only game in town.
Does it say not limited to? Is that language we could possibly add? Says here, well, I mean, it doesn't specify that. So maybe this is a very specific case where some language was shared, but in the future, I hope that won't happen. Now that we've discussed.
I think the only reference of NISBA is if a conference cost exceeds what a NISBA conference would cost, that should be requested in the budget process. It doesn't give me exclusive. Well, we'll go back and take a look, but I certainly appreciate the feedback because we want to get these comments included in for the policy committee and then bring it back here as more of a polished product.
I think it is appropriate school board.
Well, I'll wordsmith that because.
Yeah, not
Great.
Thank you.
Move on to that. Thank you.
Of course, the next one's still easy.
So. Okay, so next on the agenda is the first read, under special reports, first read of revised policy 1510, and which is regular board meetings and rules, and also the first read with immediate adoption of revised policy 2110, orientation of new board members. Steve, you want to run over those for me?
Sure, not a lot on the policy side this month, but they'll certainly change in the future. I'll start with the easy one, which is 2110, orienting and training of new board members. So the red lines are just very, very minimal. So it changes under C, item 2, the distribution of the school law book. It's cost prohibitive and not really practical to have a copy of the law book given to school board members every year. So instead, that'll be here in the district clerk's office for any time somebody would like to take a look. And it just changes under item 5, staff directory to roster. So there's no point including addresses. It would be the address of the school anyway, probably, but showing names, school, grade, subject, and position for everybody on the staff. Those are pretty basic changes. So it would not be a first read, second read, third read. We would just adopt it tonight unless anybody objected to it. 1510 is more substantial on red lines. This is largely due, and Brian or Eric, feel free to correct me if I misstate any of this. But with regard to the changes coming from the state, as far as no longer being allowed to have meetings on Zoom as we had been prior during COVID. So this spells out specific measures to video conference. So if it allows for video conferencing, similar to what I did when I conference in from Massachusetts for the reorg meeting. You make your location known. It has to be public. I was outside the library in Salem. Nobody came. I didn't think they would. But then also it spells out under extraordinary circumstances, say you are home with COVID, so you don't want to notice out your location, and they probably don't want to come and hang out with you at the meeting if you're sick. So it spells out exceptions for situations like that. But it does not allow for situations where all 7 of us are dispersed to different locations. You have to have a quorum present in the room, or at least in the same location. It doesn't necessarily be here. It has to be somewhere publicly accessible. And then sets up regulations with regard to streaming, recording, and what's made available to make sure that this is accessible in every way that it should be accessible. So did I miss anything? Feel free to jump in, Eric or Brian, if I left out any.
The only thing that I would add is that in order to take on that option of being able to remotely access a meeting as a board member, you have to provide all the recording capabilities, so on and so forth. So, and it also would require that the board pass a resolution to implement a policy that would allow it, otherwise you're not allowed to. Is that your recollection of that?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes, except the old rules about being able to conference in if the place you are conferencing from is accessible to the public, that still changes. Or that's
no, that goes back, it stays the same.
The only difference is whether or not the board has the technology and decides to use it to allow board members to video conference in when there's a quorum.
And there would have to be a quorum at the meeting locations. Okay.
And tonight's meeting is being streamed and recorded. We did at one point, about 35 or so people watching us now and been following it, so in our low 20s. For those who have interest in such things.
Moving on to the next agenda item is the public comment. It's an opportunity for anybody in the audience to address agenda items, and those would be the general resolutions only. Time limited 3 minutes, per speaker, 30 minutes total. Is there anyone who would like to address the board on any of the agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that's a new business superintendent's recommendation. So what I'd like is to ask for approval of the superintendent's recommendations on the certified resolutions. And could I get a motion on C1 through C13, please?
So moved.
A second. And Sonia, can I roll call?
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Kerr?
Yes.
Ms. Montalvo?
Yes.
Dr. Penna?
Yes.
Mr. Seepersod?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes. Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of the superintendent's recommendation on the certified stipend resolutions. Could I get a motion on CS1 and CS2, please?
So moved. Second.
And Sonia, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Kerr?
Yes.
Ms. Montalvo?
Yes.
Dr. Penna?
Yes.
Mr. Seepersod?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes. Next on the agenda is approval of the superintendent's recommendation on the non-certified resolutions. Could I get a motion on NC1 through NC5, please?
So moved. Second.
And could I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Kerr? Yes. Ms. Montalvo?
Yes.
Dr. Penna?
Yes.
Mr. Seepersod?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes. And lastly, superintendent's recommendations on the G resolutions. Could I get a motion on G1 through G13, please?
Motion. Second.
And could I have a roll call, please, Sonia?
Mr. Ames?
Yes.
Ms. Kerr?
Yes.
Montalvo?
Yes.
Dr. Penna?
Yes.
Mr. Seepersod?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes. Next on the agenda is the updates from the superintendent, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you. I just have two quick ones. One, just a celebration, just a celebration. One of our girls tennis players, Samantha, won singles class A Section 4 title. And that happened over the weekend, which is fantastic. So another great shout out to our athletes. And again, I just want to extend a sincere appreciation for all your time and work and commitment. This is School Board Recognition Week, and we started off the day beautifully at West Middle School, hosted by Ms. Bellini and her faculty, staff, and students with some beautiful music. I felt like I was being serenaded at breakfast, along with our incredible chef, Dave Stroga. And if you had not already received your gifts, in addition at your place setting today, you have our new lanyards. These are not being released to everyone yet, just the board. It might be an event this year. We'll appreciate our teachers using these, but the Believable on Become lanyards are yours, as well as the window plane, which we gave out to the full faculty earlier this year, and our new athletic logo. We did a press release to announce it, and the students who attended, the 2 students and an alum who's now teaching 8, I think, in the district, were the finalists for the running for our new athletic logo. And they came to the high school, did the pep rally, and actually both were, two of the young ladies were dressed in cheerleading outfits because they're also cheerleaders at the high school. And so they were just very, very sweet and humbled and appreciative. We gave the, I believe, number 1, who was translated into the actual logo with the 2 stars, $250 worth of clothing that has the logo on it. So she was able to appreciate that. And then the second runner received $125 worth of clothing, and they got to go and meet with Mr. Johnson, their AD, and pick out what they wanted. Just really exciting. And it is definitely out there. was in the community last weekend at an event at Beaver University and saw one of our high school students wearing a button down with the logo on it. Turns out she's in our teacher program, pathway program, so she was on campus for that. So hopefully we're gonna continue to see that used as a celebration across the district. So thank you again for your support. It really is, it's just incredible. I don't know that the public understands the hours that you put in, reading information, gathering information, discussing information each month, and I thank you.
I was curious whether these could be stick-ons, and then you hand them out at the basketball game. No? Yeah.
I have a question, where can I get one of those cute little cardigans that Tia had on today?
Like, wasn't that cute? I think that was it did say administration underneath it?
Oh, why, for it. I want one.
Yeah.
No,
It doesn't say administration.
It did?
Tia's did, but it's special.
Tia's did.
I just one without it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Make a motion over there, right?
Please.
Okay, next on the agenda. Is the agenda for next month. So we currently have the school recognition is manned. Update on academics. We're gonna go through the Schoolzilla data and maybe show us how to access that, how to read all that information. And then Steve's gonna provide an update on the policy committee plan for the year. And then, or not necessarily an update, present the policy plan for the year. And then update on athletics, which I would assume is the athletic director is gonna do that.
Yes, and so we're gonna be looking at, just numbers of sports teams, what enrollments looked like over the past year, objectives, goals for supporting that. We've already shared the improvements in the facilities previous, but they may be tied to some of the programming or youth programs, what that looked like over the summer, off-season play.
And a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Everybody but Corinne voted to adjourn.
She called it.
She made the motion first.
I was
She was out of order.
distracted.
She was out of
She
order.
was helping me
She was out of
out.
order.
I was distracted, I was looking for my ID for the school on here. I don't know where it is.
You gotta do it.
Yeah.